My name's Lucas, I'm 29, and let me just say, if you've ever thought being the responsible one in your family would earn you loyalty, respect, or even a little basic decency, you might want to sit down for this one. I grew up in a house where responsibility wasn't a shared trait. It was a burden tossed to whoever wouldn't drop it. And since I was the oldest, the one with the job, the apartment, the head on his shoulders, guess who became the family's unofficial safety net? That's right, me. Rent? Covered it more than once. Surprise bills? I was the miracle worker. My dad's car insurance? Paid every month like clockwork from my account. At first, it didn't feel like charity. It felt like family. Like stepping up because no one else could. Or maybe wouldn't. But slowly, painfully, I realized I wasn't being appreciated. I was being used. It started small. Missed calls unless they needed something. Inside jokes I wasn't part of anymore. Last-minute family gatherings I heard about after the group photos went up. But I told myself it was nothing. We're all busy, right? Life happens. People forget to include you. Doesn't mean they've forgotten you. Except, it kept happening. And every time, it stung a little more. I'd scroll through social media and see my sister Emma, 2 years younger, chronically underemployed, somehow always on vacation, tagging everyone in posts from family nights I'd never heard about. My brother Josh? He used to text me every week. Now I only heard from him when his student loan payment bounced. My mom would call sometimes, but it always had this weird guilt-laced undertone, like she was reminding me how lucky I was to have money and how I should feel good about helping them. And maybe I would have kept helping. Maybe I would have kept swallowing the loneliness and pretending everything was fine if it weren't for what happened last month. My birthday. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who throws a fit over people forgetting to send a card. But this year, I decided to do something nice for once, just for me. I booked out a private lounge at a downtown bistro I'd been dying to try. It wasn't cheap, but I figured, hey, it's my 29th, 1 year before the big 3-0. Let's make a memory. I paid the deposit in full. Set the menu. Even arranged for custom cupcakes because Emma's allergic to nuts and Josh doesn't eat dairy. I covered everything. No, bring your wallet just in case, messages. I made it as easy as possible for them to just show up, sit down, eat, and laugh. I even sent reminders. Not once, not twice, 3 times that week. Confirmed RSVPs. Emma sent a thumbs up. Josh said, sounds good. My mom replied with a heart emoji. So I got to the lounge early. Wore my nicest jacket. Had the playlist queued, the drinks ready, the lighting low and warm. I sat near the window, just watching the city lights blink on one by one, thinking this might actually be nice. 7 o'clock came. Then 7:15. I ordered a drink. Told myself they were just late. They always were. By 8, the waiter had cleared away the untouched appetizers with a sympathetic smile. I was still alone. My stomach started to knot, not from hunger but from that old, familiar dread. I pulled out my phone, opened Instagram without thinking, and there it was. A group photo. My sister, my brother, my mom, even a few cousins I hadn't seen in months. All gathered around a massive table, clinking glasses, laughing. The caption? Family first. And the location tag? A steakhouse across town. 10 minutes from where I sat. I stared at the photo for a long time. Not blinking. Not breathing. Just existing in that moment of cold, hollow disbelief. I scrolled through the comments. Wish I was there. Looks amazing. So much love in one pic. I kept waiting for someone to say, where's Lucas? But no one did. No one even noticed I wasn't there. Or maybe they did. Maybe that was the point. I didn't text them. Didn't call. I paid the tab in full, tipped well, and walked out. Not angry, numb. Like the part of me that kept making excuses for them had just gone quiet. When I got home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in the dark and thought about all the payments I'd been making quietly, automatically for years. Emma's phone bill. Josh's Netflix. My mom's utilities. The insurance, the streaming services, the little Venmo transfers for groceries that I knew were really takeout. I was the silent engine keeping their lives running. And they couldn't even be bothered to show up for dinner. The next morning, I brewed my coffee, sat down at my laptop, and opened every app, every account, every auto-pay portal. I didn't say a word. I didn't send a warning text. I just started clicking, cancel, remove payment method, turn off auto-renew. One by one, I cut every cord. I was halfway through disconnecting the last shared Spotify account when my phone buzzed. It was Emma. Hey, did you forget to pay the phone bill? My service just dropped. There was no apology. No mention of missing the dinner. Just confusion, like something must be broken, because surely I wouldn't stop providing for her. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I opened Instagram, went back to that group photo, and posted a story of my own. A single sentence, white text on a black background. Funny how family forgets who pays their bills. I didn't tag anyone. Didn't need to. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up. Missed calls, panicked texts, even a voicemail from my mom saying, "Lucas, can we talk?" This is really unfair. I didn't block anyone. That would have been too easy. Too final. No, I wanted them to sit in the silence. I wanted them to feel the weight of me not responding. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't their fixer. I wasn't their ATM. I was just gone. Quiet. And that terrified them more than anything. By noon, I had 17 unread messages. Emma sent 3 crying emojis and a voice note I didn't open. Josh texted, "Come on, man, you're being dramatic." Dramatic. Right. As if waiting alone on your birthday while your entire family celebrates without you across town is just a quirk. As if funding their lives for years and being discarded like an old receipt wasn't enough to justify a little drama. I sipped my coffee and shook my head. Around 2 p.m., my mom called again. This time I answered. "Lucas," she said, cautious. Like she wasn't sure which version of me she was going to get. I stayed silent. I heard you were upset." "You heard," I said slowly. "Noticed I wasn't at dinner, did you?" She hesitated. "Sweetheart, it wasn't. Emma said you were busy. That you had something else planned." I almost laughed. "Something else? Like the dinner I invited everyone to? That you confirmed you'd come to?" "Lucas," she sighed, "we didn't mean to hurt your feelings." "You didn't mean to," I echoed, tasting the bitterness of it. There was a long pause. "You know we love you," she added. That was when something inside me just snapped, clean and quiet like a brittle twig under pressure. "No," I said. "You love that I pay the bills. You love that I never say no. You love having someone to clean up the mess, fix the problem, bail you out. But me? The person? You forgot I existed the moment I stopped being useful." "Lucas, don't say that," she murmured, and suddenly I could hear it, real panic in her voice. Because I wasn't yelling. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't even angry. I was done. And that, more than anything, scared her. "I'm not saying it to hurt you," I said quietly. "I'm saying it because it's true." Another silence. Then, desperate. "So what now? You're just cutting us off." I almost answered, but instead I said, "Mom, did you know Emma posted family first while I was sitting alone at my own birthday dinner?" More silence. I covered the tab. I booked the lounge. I even ordered her a special cupcake. But I guess family only means something when I'm footing the bill. I didn't see that post. Well, now you know. So, yes, I've canceled everything. No more autopay. No more, "Can I borrow just until Friday?" I'm not angry. I'm just not participating anymore. "But how are we supposed to?" "That's the thing," I interrupted. "You're not supposed to rely on me. You're grown adults. Figure it out." Just like I did. I hung up before she could say more. That night, I got a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find Josh standing there, arms crossed, face tight with whatever cocktail of guilt and frustration he'd been stewing in all day. "Can we talk?" he asked. I leaned against the doorframe. "I don't think there's anything left to say." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're really doing this? Just walking away from your own family?" "Family walked away from me a long time ago," I said. Josh shifted, trying to find an angle. "You think you're the only one struggling? Bet you're the only one who's ever had to sacrifice." "No," I said, "but I am the only one who keeps sacrificing while everyone else sits back and orders dessert." That hit. His jaw tightened. "You weren't even going to tell me, were you?" I added. "Just let me find out through a picture, like some outsider scrolling through a stranger's feed." "We didn't think it was a big deal," he muttered. "You're right," I said. "It's not. Not anymore." He stood there a moment longer, like he might argue, or apologize, or punch a wall. But in the end, he just turned and walked away. And still, that wasn't the turning point. That wasn't even the climax. Because what they didn't know, what none of them bothered to pay attention to, was that the money I'd been sending, the support I gave, it was never just charity. I tied my name to a lot more than they realized. Cosign loans, family plans, utility accounts, insurance policies. Some of those things couldn't be canceled with a button. Some of them needed to be rewritten. And that, dear Reddit, is exactly what I started working on the next day. The next morning, I woke up early, earlier than usual, actually. Not out of stress, not from tossing and turning all night, but from a weird, steady calm. Like something heavy had finally been lifted. The sun was coming through the blinds and soft strips. My coffee tasted stronger. Even the silence in my apartment felt clean. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was racing to keep a dozen plates spinning in the air for everyone else. I felt like I could finally breathe. I opened my laptop and started going through every account tied to my name carefully, methodically. My brother's car loan? I'd co-signed on it 5 years ago when he didn't have the credit. I didn't even know he'd defaulted twice. That morning, I called the bank and asked about transferring liability. They said I'd have to file paperwork to release myself from the loan, but it would require his signature. I filed the forms anyway. Just having the process started gave me peace. Next up was Emma. She'd been on my health insurance plan through my employer. When she lost her part-time job last year and couldn't afford coverage, I added her as a dependent, told myself it was temporary. But she never looked for a new job, never mentioned leaving the plan. Just kept sending me Venmos with captions like, "Thanks," after each doctor visit, even when she didn't actually send anything. I submitted the removal request. Then there was the electric bill at my mom's house. It was in my name, set up years ago when their old power got shut off for non-payment. I'd forgotten it was still running through me. The last 6 months? $180, $210, $240, and no one ever mentioned the lights being on because of me. I called the utility company, explained the situation, and requested a name change on the account. They said my mom would have to apply as a new customer and pass a credit check. I gave the go-ahead. Let them handle it. I know some people would say I went too far, that I should have given them a warning, let them prepare. But here's the thing, they never warned me. Not when they planned a dinner behind my back. Not when they used my name, my money, my trust like it was disposable. So I didn't owe them the courtesy they'd never extended. A few days later, the calls started again. Not just from my family, now it was credit collectors. A car loan department. A representative from the health insurance team asking if Emma was aware of the removal. One even called my emergency contact number. Emma had listed me. I changed my number by the end of the week. That weekend, I got an email from Emma. The subject line was, "Are you serious?" Inside was just one paragraph. "I get that you're mad, but punishing all of us like this is just mean. You could have talked to us like adults. Cutting us off like we're strangers? That's low, Lucas. Real low." I stared at that email for a long time. And when I finally replied, I kept it short. Strangers don't expect me to pay their bills. Maybe that's the problem. You never saw me as family. Just a wallet that answered texts. No response. 3 days later, Josh showed up at my office. I don't know how he knew where I worked. I never told him, but I guess that's what happens when people suddenly need you again. They get creative. My assistant called and said a guy was waiting in the lobby. Looked pissed. I told her to send him up. When he walked into my office, he didn't look angry. He looked exhausted. Like he hadn't slept. Dark circles under his eyes, hands fidgeting like he didn't know what to do with them. "You really canceled the loan?" he asked, not even bothering with hello. "I started the process," I said. "You'll need to sign your half." "Why would you do that?" "You know I can't afford it on my own right now." I raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe you should have been at my birthday dinner. Or any of the dinners you didn't invite me to. Or maybe you should have checked the loan status instead of assuming I'd always be your safety net." Josh ran a hand through his hair. "We thought you were fine, man. Like, we just thought you liked being the guy who helped. You never said anything." "That's the thing," I said, leaning forward. "It's not my job to beg for respect. Or love. Or a seat at the table." He sat down, like his knees suddenly couldn't hold him anymore. "So what? This is it? You're just gonna erase yourself from the family?" I shook my head. "I didn't erase me. I erased the version of me you all depended on without giving anything back." There was a long pause. Then Josh said something I didn't expect. "Mom's crying every day." That sentence should have made me feel something. Maybe guilt. Maybe regret. But it didn't. It made me feel validated. "Then maybe she should sit with the choices she made," I replied. Just like I did. Alone. On my birthday. Josh looked up, and for the first time in years, I think he actually saw me. Not the cash cow. Not the always their big brother. But a man with limits. Boundaries. And pain. He left without saying another word. But that wasn't the end. The real twist? That came a week later, when a legal envelope showed up in my mailbox with my dad's name on the return address. A name I hadn't said out loud in over a year. And inside? Well, let's just say what was in that envelope made everything that came before look like child's play. It was a thick envelope, one of those padded ones you normally see used for sensitive paperwork or return keys. My name was handwritten on the front in a tight, familiar scrawl. I hadn't seen it in years, but it stopped me cold. My dad. We'd been estranged since the year after college. It was never one big blow-up, just the slow erosion of respect. He drank too much, blamed others for his problems, and expected the world to bend around his wants. When my mom stayed with him for the sake of the family, I knew I had to make peace with never getting the father I needed. I moved out and, over time, stopped picking up his calls. When he needed money, my mom would ask. When he got in trouble, my siblings would handle it. I stayed out of it. For good reason. But this envelope, it wasn't his style. He didn't write letters. He barely texted. He had once told me email was a government trap. So I sat on the edge of my couch and opened it with that strange mix of curiosity and dread. Inside was a letter folded over some documents. I read the letter first. Lucas, I don't expect you to read this. But if you're holding it, it means you haven't completely walked away. And if that's true, then maybe you'll understand why I'm doing this. I heard about what happened. I heard about the dinner. I wasn't invited either. Maybe that surprises you. Maybe it doesn't. But I saw that post. Family first. And for a second, I actually laughed. Because it was so backwards, I couldn't believe it. I've made a lot of mistakes. Most of them involved thinking people would stick around no matter how badly I treated them. But it turns out even bridges that look solid will burn if you soak them long enough. Enclosed is something I've been sitting on for a while. It's not charity. It's not hush money. It's just mine. And I'm giving it to you, because despite everything, you're the only one who's ever stood on your own. The only one who never came to me with his hand out. The only one I couldn't break. Do whatever you want with it. You don't owe me anything. Just don't let them take it. Dad, I didn't know what to expect when I looked at the documents underneath. Maybe some weird family photos or an old story he wanted to pass down. But it wasn't that. It was a deed. A transfer of property. To me. At first, I didn't even understand what I was looking at. But the address clicked. It was an old lake cabin. My grandfather's place. It had been in the family forever, and after he passed away, there was a bitter argument over who'd get it. Everyone assumed it had gone to my uncle. I remember my mom once saying, "Your dad messed that one up like everything else." But apparently, he hadn't. Apparently, he'd kept it. And now, he was giving it to me. Signed. Notarized. Final. I spent the rest of that night researching. The property had appreciated over the years. The land alone was worth close to $300,000, not to mention the fact that the area had become something of a resort town, meaning rental opportunities were booming. I checked tax records. He hadn't rented it out. He just let it sit. Quiet. Untouched. And now, it was mine. The timing wasn't lost on me. It felt like my father, however flawed, was drawing a line in the sand. Like he was saying, they may have forgotten you, but I didn't. Or maybe he just wanted to make sure someone in the family used it for something other than weekend selfies and empty toasts. Either way, it changed everything. I didn't tell anyone about the letter. Not at first. I needed time. I drove up to the cabin the following weekend. The air was crisp. The lake was still. The house was old but solid. It needed work, sure. But it wasn't crumbling. It had good bones. Like maybe, just maybe, I could build something with it. Something of my own. Something separate from the mess I'd left behind. I didn't post about it. Didn't take pictures. Just sat on the porch with a coffee and a quiet heart. But nothing stays quiet for long in my family. About 2 weeks later, Emma showed up at my apartment. No warning. No text. Just a knock on the door while I was halfway through dinner. I opened it and found her there, makeup smudged, eyes red. "We need to talk," she said, voice shaking. I didn't move from the doorway. "You didn't answer my emails," she continued. "Or my messages. Josh said you talked to Dad." I crossed my arms. "I didn't talk to him. I got a letter." Her face flickered. "And? Did he tell you about the cabin?" There it was. I didn't answer. Her voice went hard. "You knew that was supposed to go to Josh." "No," I said, coolly. "You assumed it would. Like everything else." Her nostrils flared. "We deserve to be part of that. It's part of the family legacy." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "You mean the family that forgot I existed unless a bill needed paying? The same family that ghosted me on my birthday and toasted to themselves across town? That wasn't about you," she snapped. It just happened that way. No, I said, stepping forward. It always happens that way. I make room for everyone. I make time. I make payments. And I get leftovers if I'm lucky. But not anymore. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't soften. I watched her search for sympathy in my face and find nothing left. We could sell it, she said finally. Split the money. It would help Mom. Josh is drowning. You don't even need it. Exactly, I said. I don't need it. That's why I won't sell it. Because it's the first thing in this family that was given to me with no strings attached. And I'm keeping it. She looked like she wanted to scream, but she just turned and stormed off down the hall. That was the last time I saw her in person. In the months that followed, things got quieter. My mom stopped calling. Josh sent a few sarcastic texts and then gave up. Emma unfollowed me on everything. But I didn't go back. I didn't chase. I didn't explain myself. I let them sit in the silence they'd earned. Instead, I fixed up the cabin. Week by week, I replaced the siding, refinished the floors, painted the walls. I'd play old music on the radio and drink coffee on the porch. Eventually, I rented it out part-time and kept it the rest of the year for myself. My own space. My own peace. Sometimes, when the lake's still and the wind's quiet, I think about how close I came to letting them break me completely. How easy it would have been to just keep paying, keep hoping, keep waiting for a seat at a table I was never really welcome at. But now I've got my own table, my own space. And the only people who sit with me are the ones who bring something real. So no, I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped holding it up by myself. And I watched calmly as they realized it couldn't stand without me. My name's Lucas, I'm 32, and I never thought my own family would be the ones to put me in a hospital bed. Growing up, I wasn't especially close to my sister, Mia. She's 2 years older, sharper with her words, and has always had a talent for making her problems everyone else's responsibility. Still, I thought we'd left the petty sibling rivalry behind years ago. I've worked hard to build a quiet, stable life for myself. Steady job, small house, no drama. She, on the other hand, married Brandon, a man I never trusted from the moment I met him. He had that too-slick charm, the kind that hides an ugly temper. Whenever they came over for family gatherings, I could feel his eyes scanning the room like he was calculating what he could get out of each person. The first sign of trouble came on a rainy Sunday afternoon about 2 months ago. I was at my parents' place, sitting at the kitchen table, when Mia came in with Brandon trailing behind her. She didn't even say hello before dropping into the chair across from me and sighing dramatically. "We need a favor," she said, as if it was already settled. Brandon leaned against the counter, arms folded, looking at me like I was a vending machine that had been taking too long to dispense his snack. They explained they were in a bit of financial trouble and needed $25,000 to clear things up. No real explanation, just vague talk about urgent debts and time-sensitive payments. I didn't need to ask to know it was something reckless, probably Brandon's gambling or one of his doomed business ideas. When I told them I couldn't just hand over that kind of money, Mia's tone shifted from pleading to accusing in seconds. "You're doing fine," she said, like it was some crime to have my finances in order. "You have savings just sitting there while we're drowning. Don't you think family should help each other?" Brandon, who'd been silent up until then, added in a low voice, "You'll regret not helping." It wasn't a threat exactly, but it lingered in the air like one. I told them I was sorry, but I wasn't going to get involved in whatever mess they were in. The conversation ended with Mia storming out and Brandon giving me a look I'll never forget. Cold, almost smug. Over the next couple of weeks, the requests turned into demands. I got texts late at night. "You've had time to think, right?" And calls from unknown numbers that went silent when I answered. I started avoiding family dinners because I knew they'd corner me again. My parents, who had always taken a stay-out-of-it approach to sibling disputes, told me I should just help them out this once and be done with it. I tried explaining that this wasn't just about the money. It was about boundaries and about the fact that if I gave in now, it would never end. But they didn't see it that way. To them, I was being stubborn. The real breaking point came one evening when Mia and Brandon showed up at my house uninvited. I was on the phone in my living room when I heard the knock, hard, insistent. The moment I opened the door, Mia brushed past me like she owned the place, while Brandon stayed on the porch, his voice already raised. "We need to talk," he said, and it wasn't a request. I told them they couldn't just show up like this, but they ignored me. Mia started going on about how they were out of options and how I was letting them sink. Brandon stepped closer, towering over me, and said, "You can fix this right now. Write the check." I don't know if it was the stress of the past few weeks or the way Brandon's tone made it sound like a command, but I snapped. I told them both to leave and never come to my house again. That's when Brandon's expression changed. His jaw tightened, and for a second I thought he might just walk away. Instead, he shoved me, hard, backward into my own hallway. I caught myself before I fell, but the adrenaline was pounding in my ears. I ordered him out again, louder this time, and after a tense few seconds, he left with Mia yelling over her shoulder that I'd regret this. I wish that had been the end of it, but things only escalated from there. The next weekend, my parents called to invite me over for dinner. I hesitated, suspecting some setup, but I missed them and thought maybe things had cooled down. When I arrived, Mia and Brandon were already there. I didn't even have time to sit down before Mia started in, bringing up their situation in front of everyone. When I told her I wasn't changing my mind, she stood up and said, "If you cared about family, you'd have done the right thing by now." Brandon muttered something under his breath that I couldn't catch, but the smirk on his face told me it wasn't friendly. It was later that night, as I was leaving, that everything turned physical. I was halfway down the stairs when I felt a sudden, forceful shove from behind. My foot slipped, and I tumbled hard, my shoulders slamming into the wall before I hit the last few steps. Pain shot up my side, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I looked up to see Brandon at the top, arms folded, and Mia next to him saying, "You should have just given us the money." Her voice was cold, almost bored, as if this was somehow my fault. My parents rushed over, asking what happened, but Mia was already spinning the story. "He tripped. It's not a big deal." I knew if I stayed there another second, I'd explode. So I told my parents I wasn't feeling well and left, clutching my side as I made it to my car. By the time I got home, the pain was worse, but I told myself I'd sleep it off. The next morning, I could barely move. That's when I decided I needed to talk to my parents alone, away from Mia and Brandon's interference. I drove over, my vision blurring more than once on the way. By the time I pulled into their driveway, I was lightheaded and drenched in sweat. I made it to the porch, knocked on the door, and that's when my knees gave out. When I came to, I was lying flat, my parents standing over me, and someone was shouting from inside the house. But it wasn't their voices that made my stomach twist, it was the words. The first thing I registered was my mom's voice, sharp and accusing, cutting through the haze. "Lucas, what is wrong with you?" she snapped, as if I had just inconvenienced her rather than collapsed on her front porch. My dad was crouched next to me, but instead of checking if I was hurt, he was glancing nervously toward the living room, like he didn't want to make a scene. I tried to sit up, but the pain in my ribs made me gasp. I just need a minute," I muttered, wincing. My mom folded her arms. "You're being dramatic. You probably skipped breakfast, and now you're fainting all over the place." That's when I heard Brandon's voice from inside, low but not low enough. "Told you he's soft. Can't even handle a few stairs." Mia's laugh followed, sharp and humorless. "And yet he's sitting on all that money like a dragon on a pile of gold." My parents didn't say anything to defend me. In fact, my mom glanced back toward the doorway and rolled her eyes, as if silently agreeing with them. It was like I wasn't their son standing there hurt. I was just the roadblock between Mia and her next handout. Eventually, my dad helped me inside, though helped might be too generous. He kept a firm grip on my arm, but more like he was steering me toward the couch to get me out of the way. Mia was already seated at the dining table with Brandon, sipping coffee like it was just another morning. "Rough night?" she asked with that mock sympathy I'd grown to hate. I didn't answer, just lowered myself into the nearest chair. The pain in my side was a steady throb now, making it hard to focus, but I caught the way Brandon was watching me, studying me, almost as if he was waiting for me to say something he could twist. Breakfast was tense, mostly because Mia and Brandon steered every conversation back to their situation. My mom was playing mediator, which in her language meant siding with them while pretending to be neutral. "Lucas," she said at one point, "they've been under so much stress lately. You have to understand, they wouldn't be asking if it wasn't serious." I wanted to ask her how shoving me down the stairs fit into that narrative of desperation, but I bit my tongue. My dad kept his head down, focusing on his plate like the eggs were the most fascinating thing in the world. Mia leaned forward. "You're making this harder than it has to be. You know you could solve this in 5 minutes, right? She slid a folded piece of paper toward me. It was a loan agreement she'd clearly prepared ahead of time, complete with spaces for my signature and bank details. I didn't touch it. I already told you no, I said quietly. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually drop the act. But instead, she glanced at my mom, who gave me that disappointed look I'd seen too many times growing up, the one that said I'd let the family down. Brandon finally spoke, his voice low and smug. This isn't going away, Lucas. You think you can just ignore it, but you're going to wish you'd handled it the easy way. The worst part was the way my parents didn't react. Not to the veiled threat, not to the memory of what had happened on the stairs, nothing. It was like they'd all silently agreed that I was the problem here. Every bite of food tasted like sand in my mouth. After breakfast, my mom pulled me aside in the hallway. Just sign it, she whispered. It'll keep the peace. I stared at her, stunned. Keep the peace, I said. He shoved me down the stairs, Mom. She flinched, but not because of what I'd said. More like she was embarrassed I'd brought it up. You probably just lost your balance, she said quickly. No need to make accusations. That was the moment something in me shifted. If my own parents weren't going to acknowledge what happened, if they were willing to excuse it for the sake of avoiding conflict, then I couldn't trust them to protect me from whatever came next. I left not long after, ignoring Mia's overly sweet "bye, Lucas" as I passed. My ribs hurt too much to drive straight home, so I pulled over at a quiet park and just sat there for a while, trying to process how quickly things had spiraled. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the realization that my family had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. The more I thought about it, the more I could see all the smaller moments over the years where Mia had been favored, where I'd been expected to quietly absorb the unfairness for the sake of family harmony. That day marked the start of something different. I stopped answering Mia's calls altogether and let my parents' texts go unanswered when they were clearly fishing for updates on the situation. But the distance didn't stop them, it just made them bolder. The next time I saw my parents, my mom casually mentioned that Mia and Brandon had been helping around the house lately. Repairs, errands, even paying for groceries. It was obvious what they were doing, painting themselves as the supportive children while I was the selfish one. My dad, who rarely spoke up, added, "You know, it's not a great look, you staying away like this." It wasn't just the manipulation, it was the way they were rewriting the narrative in real time. I could feel the ground shifting under me, and I knew that if I didn't find a way to take control of the situation, I'd be the villain in every family story from here on out. And then came the day I got the call from my dad that changed everything. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was halfway through a work project when my phone lit up with my dad's name. We rarely spoke on the phone unless something was wrong, so my first thought was that maybe his health had taken a turn. His voice was oddly calm, almost rehearsed. "Lucas," he said, "I need you to come over. There's something we need to talk about. It's about the house." My house. I felt a strange prickle at the back of my neck. "What about it?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "Just come over. We'll explain." That word, "we," made my stomach drop. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, Mia's car was already there. I walked in to find the three of them sitting at the dining table like they'd been waiting for me. My mom smiled tightly. "Good, you're here. We can all be adults about this." I didn't sit down. I stayed standing, looking from one face to another. Mia looked smug. Brandon's absence was conspicuous, but somehow made the air feel thicker, and my dad wouldn't meet my eyes. Mia was the one who spoke first. "So, we've been thinking," she began, like this was a casual brainstorming session. "You have that house sitting there, mostly paid off, and we're in a bad spot with this debt. Selling it would cover everything, and then some. You could rent for a while. It's just a house. You can always buy another one later." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the audacity was so staggering. "You're not serious," I said. My dad cleared his throat. "It would be the fastest way to resolve this situation," he offered quietly. "And it would help your sister and her husband get back on their feet." My mom jumped in with, "Think about how much stress it would take off the family." I stared at them, feeling like the floor had tilted under me. "You want me to sell my home, to bail them out of a mess they made?" I said slowly. Mia rolled her eyes. "It's not just for us, Lucas. It's for the family. We all benefit when everyone's stable." Her tone had that false generosity, as if she was doing me some kind of favor by letting me be the hero of her disaster. When I didn't answer right away, she leaned back and crossed her arms. "You know, you're making this harder than it has to be. If you're not going to step up voluntarily, there are other ways." That last sentence hit me harder than the shove down the stairs. I looked at my parents, expecting at least one of them to tell her she was out of line, but they both stayed silent. My mom's eyes flicked away. My dad rubbed the back of his neck. It dawned on me then. They'd already decided. This wasn't a request. This was them telling me what was going to happen. "What exactly does that mean?" I asked, my voice low. My dad sighed, finally meeting my eyes. We talked to a friend who's in real estate. There's interest in your property. If you put it on the market now, you could get a great price. Mia and Brandon have already spoken to a lender about their debt situation, and this would settle everything cleanly." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "You've been making plans to sell my house without even asking me." My mom's lips tightened. "We thought you'd be reasonable about it. It's not like we're trying to hurt you. You'll land on your feet. You always do. Your sister needs this more than you do." That was the moment something in me went cold. It wasn't just the betrayal of them siding with Mia. It was the realization that they saw my stability as a resource to be harvested whenever she burned through hers. They didn't care what it cost me, physically, emotionally, financially. To them, I was just a safety net, and if I refused to catch her, I was selfish. I told them no. Firmly, finally. No explanations, no softening it. Just no. Mia's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this," she said again, like it was some mantra she lived by. My mom shook her head in disappointment, and my dad just looked tired. I turned and walked out without another word. But the whole drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that they'd find some way to push harder. And I was right, because 3 days later, I got home from work to find an envelope taped to my front door. Inside the envelope was a letter from a property management company I'd never heard of, informing me that they had been retained to handle inquiries and negotiations related to the potential sale of my property. It was written in that sterile, corporate tone that tries to sound friendly, but really just hides the fact that something's already in motion without you. My heart sank. I hadn't signed anything, hadn't even agreed to meet anyone. Yet here it was in black and white. Someone had authorized them to start the process. I called the number listed, my voice tight, and after being transferred twice, I finally spoke to a manager. She cheerfully informed me that my family members had assured them I was fully on board and that they were preparing a listing packet. I cut her off immediately. "That's not true. I never gave permission." There was a pause, then the carefully measured response. "Oh, well, in that case, we'll hold off, but I'll need written confirmation from you to stop the file." Her tone made it clear she thought this was just a misunderstanding, but I knew better. This wasn't a mistake. It was a test to see how far they could go before I pushed back. I sat there in my kitchen with the letter in my hand, feeling the walls closing in. They hadn't just crossed a boundary, they'd bulldozed through it. And the worst part was knowing that if they'd been able to get their hands on any of my personal documents, they probably would have tried to forge my consent entirely. That week, I kept to myself more than usual. I ignored calls from my parents, left Mia's texts unread, and even blocked Brandon's number. But isolation has a way of making things heavier. Every time I walked through my house, I wondered how close I'd come to losing it without even knowing. Sleep became elusive. When I did manage to rest, I'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced I heard someone at the door. My ribs still ached from the fall down the stairs, and the constant discomfort was a reminder that I wasn't just imagining their malice. My work started to suffer, too. I'd sit at my desk staring at spreadsheets, the numbers blurring until I had to step away. Friends invited me out, but I found excuses to stay home. I didn't want to answer questions I couldn't explain without sounding like I was making it all up. Because honestly, if someone told me their own family was trying to force sell their house, I'm not sure I would have believed it either. One night, after ignoring yet another call from my dad, I opened my laptop and started quietly gathering information, property law in my state, steps to legally block unauthorized sales, even looking up ways to secure my home and finances. It wasn't a plan yet, but it was the start of one. I needed to know exactly where I stood before they tried their next move. The real gut punch came a few days later when I finally spoke to one of my parents' neighbors. She mentioned casually that Mia and Brandon had been by my parents' house a lot lately, helping with things and talking about how I was thinking of downsizing soon. Downsizing? That was their cover story. They were planting seeds in the neighborhood so that if a sale happened, people would think it was my idea. The manipulation wasn't just aimed at me anymore. It was about controlling the narrative so thoroughly that by the time I fought back, no one would believe my side. That night, I sat in my dark living room. No TV, no music, just me and the hum of the fridge. I thought about everything. How quickly it had all escalated, how my parents had become enablers, how Mia and Brandon seemed to move like they were always 2 steps ahead. And in that stillness, something in me hardened. If they wanted to play this game, they'd find out I was done being the quiet, accommodating one. I wasn't ready to strike back yet, but I knew I needed to start shifting the balance. That meant playing along just enough to make them think I was retreating, when really, I was watching every move they made. So the next time my mom called, I answered. I let her talk about the good offers they'd heard about how now's the perfect time to sell. I even said, I'll think about it, just to see the trap spring a little further. And in her voice, I heard exactly what I was waiting for, relief. She thought she was winning, but I was already starting to think about what winning would look like for me. And it wasn't going to be quiet. That's when, a week later, I got a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a person who, without knowing it yet, might be the key to turning this entire thing around. The message came late on a Thursday evening, just as I was about to shut down my laptop. It was from Ethan, an old friend from college I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. Back then, we'd been close, but life had taken us in different directions. I remembered he'd gone into real estate and property law, though I hadn't kept up with his career. His message was short. Heard through the grapevine you've got some family drama involving your house. Call me. For a second, I wondered how he'd even found out. Then I remembered Mia's little downsizing campaign. Clearly, word had reached further than I'd realized. Still, the fact that it reached him, of all people, felt like the universe had just dealt me a card I didn't know I had. I called him immediately. His voice was the same, calm, steady, but with that edge of precision I remembered from the way he used to debate in class. After a bit of catching up, he cut right to it. Lucas, I work with property disputes all the time. If what I've heard is true, you need to lock this down yesterday. I can make sure no one sells, transfers, or even shows your house without your explicit, written consent. But we should also talk about, well, leverage. Leverage. That was a word I hadn't allowed myself to think about yet, but hearing it made something in my chest tighten in a good way. We set up a meeting for the next morning, and I hung up with a flicker of hope I hadn't felt in weeks. Meeting with Ethan was like stepping into a different world, one where I wasn't the cornered animal anymore. He laid everything out clearly, filing a legal notice to protect my property, putting my financial accounts under tighter security, even setting up a separate LLC to shield my other assets. It's not just about stopping them, he said, leaning back in his chair. It's about making it so expensive and inconvenient for them to even try that they give up on their own. We got to work immediately. By the end of the week, the property management company that had sent me that letter received a formal cease and desist. Any attempt to move forward would result in legal action. My accounts were updated with new protections, 2-factor authentication, withdrawal limits, and a private alert system that would notify me instantly if anyone tried anything suspicious. But Ethan didn't stop there. He started digging. Not illegally, just using public records and connections. Within a few days, he had a stack of information on Mia and Brandon's financial situation, most of which confirmed what I'd suspected: credit card debt, late payments, and a failed consulting business that had tanked last year. There were also whispers of Brandon owing money to someone you didn't want to owe money to. Having this knowledge changed everything. I no longer felt like I was waiting for the next blow. I was watching them, quietly building a picture of just how deep they were sinking. And the deeper they sank, the more I realized, if I played this right, I could not only protect myself, but make sure they could never pull something like this on me again. Meanwhile, I started making changes in my own life. I poured more time into work, and with the stress slowly lifting, my performance improved. My boss noticed. A month later, I got a raise. Nothing life-changing, but enough to remind me that I was moving forward while they were stuck in quicksand. I also reconnected with a few old friends, ones who remembered me as the guy who used to be quick to laugh, not the one constantly looking over his shoulder. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again. But I didn't let Mia and Brandon know any of that. When I saw my parents and they inevitably asked how I was doing, I gave vague answers, even let them think I was still on the fence about the house. It was important they believed I was still in retreat. People get sloppy when they think they're winning, and they were getting sloppy. Ethan tipped me off that Brandon had recently tried to put one of their cars in Mia's name only, probably to hide it from someone else. Their desperation was growing, and desperation makes people careless. I knew it was only a matter of time before they made a mistake I could use. Then one afternoon, I got an unexpected email from a local event coordinator. Apparently, Mia and Brandon were hosting some kind of investment dinner in 2 weeks, pitching a new business venture. The guest list included several people I knew from town, people with money, people they were clearly hoping to squeeze for startup capital. That dinner, that was where things could shift for good. And if I played it right, it would be the night they lost far more than they'd ever hoped to gain. The moment I saw that email about their investment dinner, I knew it was the crack in the wall I'd been waiting for. Ethan and I went over it line by line. Mia and Brandon were pitching some vague real estate redevelopment project, complete with projected returns that were way too optimistic to be real. The flyer had buzzwords like exclusive opportunity and limited investor slots, but nothing concrete. No location details beyond prime properties and no actual development plans. Ethan leaned back in his chair after reading it. This, he said, tapping the printout with one finger, is a problem for them waiting to happen. If they take a single check without delivering on this, it's fraud. And considering their history, I'd bet my next paycheck they've got nothing solid lined up. The idea began forming almost immediately. I didn't need to sabotage them outright, not yet. All I had to do was be in the right place at the right time with the right information. If I could get eyes on their pitch, I could verify exactly how far they were willing to go to mislead people. And if they crossed that legal line, that would be my golden ticket. I had one obstacle. I wasn't on the guest list. But I did notice something interesting. One of the invitees was a mutual acquaintance, Mrs. Hathaway, an older woman my parents had known for years. She owned several properties around town and was exactly the kind of person Mia and Brandon would drool over for an investment partner. I reached out under the pretense of catching up, and sure enough, she mentioned the dinner. "I'm not sure if I'll go," she said, but it sounded ambitious. That was all I needed. A few careful questions later, she was offering me her spot. "Frankly," she said, "I'd feel better if someone with a good head for numbers looked it over before I committed to anything." I told her I'd be happy to attend in her place, and by the end of the call, I had the date, the venue, and a printed invitation in my name. The following week, I prepared like I was going into a negotiation. Ethan helped me put together a short list of questions that would seem innocent to most people, but would force Mia and Brandon to reveal whether they actually had anything to back up their claims. If they dodged, if they got defensive, if they lied, it would all be noted. And yes, I brought a discreet recording device. Not for blackmail, but for protection. I wanted everything documented in case this turned into a legal matter. In the meantime, I made another move, one that had nothing to do with the dinner, but would shift the power dynamic entirely. I refinanced my house under my LLC's name, locking it behind layers of legal structure that would make it nearly impossible for anyone to mess with without my consent. It also meant that if Mia or Brandon were somehow still scheming to get at it, they were now aiming at a target that was legally walled off. 2 days before the dinner, my mom called me out of the blue. "Your sister mentioned you might be thinking about helping them with a new project," she said, her voice hopeful. "If you came in as a partner, it would really show you're willing to put the past behind you." I kept my tone neutral. "I'll see what they're offering." She sounded almost giddy, clearly thinking I was finally folding. But in reality, I was walking into their world on my terms. I'd be surrounded by their potential marks, hearing their pitch firsthand, and gathering every shred of evidence I might need. This wasn't just about defense anymore. It was about building the kind of position from which I could finally hit back hard enough that they'd think twice before ever coming near me again. When the night of the dinner came, I arrived early. The venue was a rented private room in an upscale restaurant downtown. All white tablecloths and low lighting meant to make the evening feel exclusive. A hostess showed me to my seat near the center of the long table, directly across from where Mia and Brandon would be standing to present. I could see the glossy folders at each place setting, each one stamped with the name of their so-called company. As the other guests began to filter in, I kept my expression polite, blending in as just another curious investor. But under the table, my phone was already recording. I wasn't here to make small talk. I was here to listen and to catch them in the act if they overstepped. And judging by the confident, almost arrogant way they walked into that room a few minutes later, they were planning to overstep in a big way. Mia and Brandon entered like they were walking onto a stage they owned. Mia wore a sleek navy dress, all smiles and charm, while Brandon had on one of those expensive-looking suits that you could tell was bought on credit. They worked the room before the dinner even started, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, sprinkling in little comments about how lucky the investors in this room were to be getting in early. When everyone was seated, Brandon took the lead. He spoke with that salesman's rhythm, just enough detail to sound informed, just vague enough to avoid real commitment. "We've identified multiple prime properties ready for redevelopment," he said, clicking through slides of glossy stock images that weren't tied to any actual location. "Our projections show a 20% return in the first year alone." I watched their guests nod, some already intrigued, others politely skeptical. I bided my time until the Q&A section, letting them spin their fantasy uninterrupted. Then, when Mia cheerfully asked if there were any questions before we pass out the sign-up sheets, I raised my hand. "Can you tell us the exact addresses of these prime properties?" I asked, my voice even. The room quieted slightly, just a subtle shift, but I could feel the air change. Brandon blinked. "Well, due to confidentiality agreements with the current owners." I cut in gently. "Right, but without specific properties, how can investors verify zoning, redevelopment feasibility, or ownership records? Especially since some of the photos in your presentation are stock images. Like this one." I tapped the glossy folder in front of me, flipping to a picture of a modern building. "This is a hotel in Vancouver. I found it in under 30 seconds on Google Images." Mia's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "The images are for illustrative purposes only. We're protecting our clients' privacy." I nodded like I understood completely, then tilted my head. "Of course. And the projected 20% return. How did you calculate that without fixed property costs, contractor bids, or municipal approval timelines?" My tone stayed calm, almost curious, but I could see Brandon's jaw tightening. A man 2 seats down cleared his throat. "Yeah, that's a good point. Do you have documentation we can review before committing?" The domino effect was immediate. Others began murmuring, asking about permits, escrow accounts, past projects. The easy atmosphere Mia and Brandon had built started to crumble, and I just sat there, letting the questions roll in, occasionally nudging them further. Brandon's answers got shorter, sharper. Mia tried to redirect the conversation to trust and vision, but the investors weren't buying it anymore. One woman flat out said, "If you can't show us a single property or contract, I'm not putting a cent into this." Then came the final blow, one I hadn't planned but had ready just in case. When Brandon muttered something about people spreading false rumors about their finances, I pulled out a printed copy of their most recent LLC filing, which Ethan had dug up. "Interesting," I said lightly, "because according to public records, your company was only registered 3 months ago, and it's currently listed as at risk for failing to file required disclosures." I set it on the table, right next to my untouched wine glass. "Care to explain?" Silence. You could have heard a fork drop. Mia's face flushed, and Brandon's eyes darted toward the exit. A couple of guests quietly gathered their things. The older gentleman at the head of the table said, "I think that's enough for me," and stood to leave. One by one, the rest followed. Within 5 minutes, the exclusive investment dinner had dissolved into a cold, awkward shuffle out the door. I stayed seated until the last guest left. Mia finally snapped, her voice low and shaking. "What are you doing here?" I leaned back in my chair, meeting her glare without flinching. "Making sure no one else gets dragged into your mess. You should thank me. I just saved you from promising returns you can't deliver." Which, by the way, is fraud. Brandon took a step forward like he was about to say something, but I stood, calmly gathering the folder and my phone. "Oh, and this whole thing," I gestured to the now empty room. "Recorded. Every word. In case you get any ideas about blaming me for your failure tonight." I walked out without another glance back, but as I reached the door, I heard Mia's voice, tight, furious, not directed at me. "This is your fault," she hissed at Brandon. "You weren't ready. It was the first time I'd ever heard them turn on each other. And it wouldn't be the last. Over the next few days, the ripples from that night spread fast. Word got around in the small business circles in town, investors talk, and the story of an investment dinner that collapsed under basic questions was too juicy to keep quiet. By the weekend, Mia and Brandon's names were quietly blacklisted from several local networking groups. The kind of people they depended on for handouts now crossed the street to avoid them. Ethan called me 2 days later with the best news yet. One of the attendees filed a formal complaint, he said, his voice almost gleeful. State regulators are looking into their business. If they can't provide documentation, and we both know they can't, they could face fines or worse. He also mentioned that my recording from the dinner was now in the hands of a very persistent investigator who had a particular interest in cases like theirs. It wasn't just professional fallout. My parents, who had been cool toward me for weeks, called in a panic one evening. My mom's voice trembled. "Your sister says people are spreading lies about her. She's in tears. You have to help clear this up." I stayed silent for a long moment before saying, "Everything people are saying came from her own mouth. I didn't have to make anything up." There was a pause, then my dad asked quietly, "So it's true?" I didn't answer directly. "You should ask her." I hung up before they could say anything else. That was the last time they tried to pull me into her defense. Within a month, Mia and Brandon had quietly moved out of their upscale rental and into a cramped apartment on the edge of town. Their real estate company was officially dissolved in state records for failing to comply with basic filing requirements. Brandon, from what I heard, took a job he swore he'd never do, working for someone else. Mia stayed off social media entirely, which for her was like vanishing from the planet. As for me, life settled into a calm I hadn't felt in a long time. My house was secure, my finances untouchable, and my ties to their chaos severed. I still saw my parents now and then, but our conversations stayed polite and surface level. They knew better than to bring up helping my sister again. One afternoon, I was leaving a coffee shop when I spotted Mia across the street. She saw me too. For a moment, it looked like she might come over, but instead she just stood there, her expression a mix of anger and something else, recognition, maybe, that she'd finally run into someone she couldn't manipulate. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just got in my car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving her standing on the sidewalk. Because for the first time in my life, I knew I wasn't the one carrying the weight anymore. And I had no intention of ever picking it up again. My name's Lucas, I'm 27, and if I'm being honest, family reunions have always been a mix of dread and duty for me. On one hand, they were supposed to be about togetherness, catching up with cousins, eating too much food, and reliving old stories. On the other, they had a darker side, one that revolved around the kind of relatives who kept score on everything. Every degree, every job, every car in the driveway was silently measured, weighed, and compared. My extended family had a way of turning even the most casual backyard barbecue into a competition where someone always had to be less than. I usually played the role of the quiet one, keeping my head down, answering questions politely, and escaping early when I could. But this year's reunion would turn out different. This year, the mask slipped, and the cruel truth of how they saw me came spilling out. When I pulled into the park where the reunion was being held, I actually felt a little hopeful. I'd been working hard lately. Nothing flashy, but I had a steady job. I'd finally paid off some debts that had weighed me down for years, and I was even thinking about moving into a better place soon. Small wins, but they mattered to me. I walked across the grass carrying a bowl of pasta salad, trying to put a smile on my face before stepping into the sea of familiar voices. The air smelled like grilled burgers and sunscreen. Kids were running around with water balloons, and the sound of my uncle's booming laugh carried over the picnic tables. For a second, it almost felt normal. But then came the moment, the one that stuck. As I approached the cluster of folding chairs under the pavilion, my Aunt Denise spotted me first. She had always been sharp-tongued, the kind of person who thought her opinions were just being honest, when in reality, they cut like blades. She looked me up and down, her lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer, and said loud enough for everyone around her to hear, "Well, look who decided to crawl out of the woodwork. We didn't think you'd show your face here after all your failures." The laughter that followed wasn't just hers. My cousins chuckled awkwardly, my uncle let out a low whistle, and even a couple of people I barely recognized from the extended family tree smiled nervously, as if laughing along was safer than being the target. I felt the smile on my own face freeze, my grip on the salad bowl tightening until I thought it might shatter. It wasn't just the words, it was the timing, the public spectacle, the way she made my presence into a joke. For a split second, I wanted to vanish. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the old shame creeping in, the one that had shadowed me for years when things hadn't gone right. But then something shifted. Instead of shrinking, a different thought planted itself firmly in my mind. I wasn't going to let this pass. Not this time. Not anymore. I set the bowl down on the nearest table and forced myself to keep my face neutral. Inside, though, it was like a storm was gathering. Denise's smile stayed on me a second longer, almost like she was checking to see if her jab had landed. She wanted me to flinch, to lower my head, to confirm the story she had built about me, the one where I was always behind, always the black sheep, always a convenient punchline. But I didn't. I just pulled out a chair, sat down quietly, and started to engage in small talk with one of my cousins as though nothing had happened. I could feel Denise's eyes still on me, waiting for the reaction she craved, and when she didn't get it, she clicked her tongue and turned back to her circle. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but of course it wasn't. That little exchange was just the opening shot in a long afternoon of subtle digs, pointed comparisons, and innocent remarks that all circled back to the same theme. Me, the one who hadn't measured up. Every time someone asked about work, Denise made a show of sighing and saying, "Well, not everyone can be successful, I suppose." When my cousin Eric mentioned he was buying a new car, she glanced at me and asked, "Still driving that old thing, Lucas?" Even when the topic had nothing to do with me, she found a way to turn it into a reminder of where she thought I stood. And all the while, that laugh of hers, sharp, dismissive, carrying just enough weight to make others join in, rang in my ears. I can't lie, it hurt. It always had. For years, I had let people like her dictate how I saw myself. Every time I stumbled, their voices seemed to echo louder in my head than my own. But sitting there that day, feeling the sting of her words and the burn of embarrassment, I also felt something else. A kind of clarity. If Denise wanted me to be the joke of the family, fine. But I had my own plans, ones she didn't know about yet. And the smile she flashed when she thought she had me cornered? That was the first one I decided I was going to erase. And that's where it really began. Because as much as Denise loved the spotlight, she had no idea that the show she was putting on was laying the perfect groundwork for what was coming next. As the afternoon stretched on, the weight of Denise's words lingered in the air like humidity that wouldn't break. It didn't matter how many polite conversations I tried to steer myself into. Somehow the current always looped back around to me, dragging me into the spotlight I never asked for. And every time, Denise was the one nudging it forward, her voice slicing through like a conductor's baton, making sure everyone remembered the role I was supposed to play in the family narrative. It started small, just comments slipped in between bites of potato salad. When my cousin Eric mentioned his new promotion, Denise clapped her hands and said, "Now that's what I like to see. Someone moving up in the world. Not everyone can say that." Her eyes flicked toward me as casually as someone brushing lint off their shirt, but the message hit like a brick. A few people chuckled, and I noticed the way heads tilted ever so slightly in my direction, waiting to see if I'd take the bait. I didn't. Instead, I took a long sip of lemonade and forced myself to smile. My silence was starting to irritate her. I could see it in the way her nose twitched when her barbs didn't land quite right. But Denise didn't stop there. At one point, while the kids were running wild with water balloons and a few adults started setting up a volleyball net, my aunt decided it was the perfect time to launch into one of her favorite games, family comparisons. She always treated them like harmless fun, but everyone knew better. "Let's see," she said loudly, clapping her hands to gather attention. "We've got Eric, who's doing so well at his new job. Did you hear they're considering him for a management role already? Then there's Rebecca, top of her class at university, practically guaranteed a scholarship for grad school. And of course little Thomas, already winning medals in track and field. Oh, we have such talented people in this family." She paused dramatically, letting the words hang in the air before turning her gaze on me. And then, "Well, Lucas is here too." The group erupted into laughter, not malicious from everyone, but uneasy, forced laughter. The kind people do when they don't know whether to push back or join in. Denise, of course, laughed the loudest, as though she'd just told the best joke of the day. My chest tightened, and I had to clench my jaw to stop myself from snapping. I wanted to remind her that I wasn't unemployed, that I had been climbing my own quiet path, that my life wasn't hers to measure out in teaspoons of disappointment. But I held my tongue, not because I didn't have the words, but because something inside me told me to wait. She was digging her own grave, and I was going to make sure she buried herself in it. By dinner time, things had gotten worse. My uncle grilled burgers and hot dogs, and we all lined up buffet style. When I finally got to the front, Denise swooped in behind me, her voice sharp and deliberate. "Oh, don't take too much, Lucas. You know, until you get your life figured out, maybe it's best to leave the big plates to the ones earning them." I froze with the tongs in my hand, the metal clinking against the pan as everyone within earshot turned to look. A couple of teenagers snickered, and one of my cousins muttered, "That's cold," under his breath. Denise just smiled sweetly, as if she'd said something caring rather than cruel. My appetite vanished, and I set my plate down half full, the food tasting like sawdust when I tried to force it down later. But the final straw that day wasn't about me directly. It was about my parents. My mom and dad had always been supportive, even if they didn't flaunt it. They were quieter, more reserved than the rest of the family, and because of that, Denise often treated them like afterthoughts. As we were all sitting around finishing dinner, she leaned back in her chair, patted her stomach, and said, "Well, at least most of us have raised successful children. Some people, I guess, just didn't know how to instill ambition." The air went still. My mom lowered her fork slowly, her lips tightening, and my dad's shoulders stiffened. They didn't say a word, but I saw the hurt flash across their faces. It wasn't just about me anymore. She was insulting them too, undermining the effort and love they had poured into raising me. My hands curled into fists in my lap, nails biting into my palms. Every fiber of me wanted to lash out, to make her choke on her smugness, but I stayed quiet, staring at the fading sunlight beyond the pavilion. Because something had shifted again. Denise thought she had won. She thought she'd turn me into the running joke of the reunion, another story for her to retell later with a satisfied smirk. But what she didn't realize was that every cruel word, every backhanded jab, every laugh at my expense was etching itself into my memory. Not as shame, but as fuel. She was giving me all the kindling I needed. And while everyone else might have thought it was just another year of Denise being Denise, I knew better. I was already planning, quietly, carefully. And when the time came, it wouldn't just be a comeback. It would be something she never saw coming. And then the microphone crackled. My uncle had set up a small PA system for the family announcements they did every year, where people would share milestones, engagements, graduations, promotions. Denise's eyes lit up as she strutted toward it, grabbing the mic like she was about to deliver the State of the Union. She glanced around, scanning the crowd, and I swear her eyes locked on me for half a second before she smiled wider. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice ringing out. "This year has been incredible for so many of us. Eric's promotion, Rebecca's scholarship, Thomas's athletic success. Oh, I could go on. Truly, our family is full of achievers. And of course, we're all so grateful for the support of each other. Well, most of us, anyway." She let that hang, the corners of her mouth twitching as murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt something in me snap. And that was the moment I realized. Denise had just handed me the perfect stage. The microphone in Denise's hand was like a weapon, and she knew exactly how to wield it. Her voice, sharp and confident, carried across the park as if the entire reunion were her personal stage. I sat frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears, trying to predict where she would take it next. The jabs earlier in the day had been cruel enough, but what she did next would carve a line in the sand, one that I could never step back from. She tapped the microphone twice, like she wanted to make sure every single person was paying attention, and said, "You know, it's funny how families work. Some of us thrive, build real lives, real success, and some of us," she paused, eyes sweeping the pavilion until they landed squarely on me. "Well, some of us just can't seem to get it together, no matter how much help they've been given." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. That silence, that compliance, it gave her courage. She smiled thinly and went on, her words cutting deeper with every syllable. Now, I don't want to embarrass anyone, but I think we should be honest about where we stand. Lucas, dear, why don't you come up here and tell everyone what exactly you've been doing with yourself lately? We'd all love to know what keeps you so busy. For a second, I thought I must have misheard her. Surely she wouldn't put me on the spot like that, not in front of 50 people, not after the way she'd already cornered me throughout the day. But no, she was dead serious. I could see the gleam in her eyes, the anticipation of watching me squirm, stutter, and fail under the weight of everyone's gaze. I stayed seated, gripping the edge of the picnic bench so hard my knuckles turned white. My mom whispered my name softly, almost as if she were trying to protect me with nothing but her voice. But Denise wasn't finished. She leaned closer to the mic, her voice dropping into that faux sympathetic tone she used when she wanted to twist the knife. Or maybe I should help him out, she said, since he's too shy to admit it. You see, while Eric's been climbing the ladder at work and Rebecca's preparing for grad school, our dear Lucas has been, well, let's just say between opportunities. Still working odd jobs, still trying to figure out where he fits in this world. Isn't that right? A low ripple of laughter spread through the group, nervous but undeniable. I felt my chest tighten, heat rushing up my neck. She wasn't just mocking me now. She was exposing me, stripping away every ounce of dignity I had left in front of the entire family. But then she went further. Too far. She turned her head slightly, as though confiding in the crowd, and added, "You know, it's such a shame. His parents sacrificed so much for him. College tuition, rent, even paying off that little mess with his credit card debt a few years ago. And this is the thanks they get. I suppose some people just can't carry the weight of responsibility." The words hit like a physical blow. My jaw dropped, and I heard my mom gasp beside me. That was supposed to be private, something no one outside of my immediate family even knew about. My parents had helped me when I was drowning, and I had worked tirelessly since then to repay them, to rebuild my life, brick by brick. And now Denise had taken that moment of vulnerability, that chapter of my past, and weaponized it in front of every single person I shared blood with. My dad stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the concrete floor, but before he could speak, Denise's voice cut through again. "Oh, don't look at me like that," she said, still smiling. "We're family. Families are supposed to be open, right? Besides, maybe a little tough love will finally light a fire under him." The crowd was dead silent now, no more nervous laughter. A few cousins looked at me with wide eyes. Others looked down at their plates. I could feel the pity radiating off of them, and somehow that felt worse than the laughter had. My parents' faces were stricken, and I knew they were blaming themselves for not stepping in sooner, not shielding me from her venom. But inside me, something hardened. It wasn't just humiliation anymore. It wasn't just anger. It was betrayal, so sharp, so undeniable, that it cleaved straight through the shame and left only resolve. She had taken my past struggles, twisted them, and broadcast them like a trophy for her own ego. She wanted to define me by my lowest points, to etch that image permanently into the minds of everyone present. But what she didn't understand was that betrayal has a funny way of waking you up, of reminding you exactly who someone is, and exactly why they can never be trusted again. I sat there, staring at Denise as she handed the microphone back to my uncle, her smirk wide and satisfied like she had just won some invisible war. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. And I was going to make sure she remembered this day, not as the one where she broke me, but as the one where she set in motion the downfall she never saw coming. And just as I thought the humiliation was over, Denise leaned across the table as she passed me on her way back to her seat and whispered, "You'll thank me one day." I didn't move. I didn't blink. But inside, a plan was already forming, one careful piece at a time. The rest of the reunion passed in a blur I could barely process. Conversations hummed around me. Laughter floated through the air, but I felt like I was sealed inside a glass box, cut off from everything. Every sound was muffled, every face slightly distorted. Denise's words replayed in my head on an endless loop, her voice booming into the microphone, her little aside about my parents, her smug whisper as she walked past me. The more I thought about it, the heavier it pressed down, until even lifting my fork to eat felt like a chore. People avoided my gaze after that. A few cousins gave me sympathetic smiles, but most looked away quickly, not wanting to get dragged into the awkwardness. I caught snippets of whispers. "Did you know about that?" I had no idea. Poor guy. It was worse than open mockery. Pity was something I couldn't stomach. It stripped me down, made me feel like a child again, fragile and incapable. I excused myself before dessert and wandered off toward the edge of the park. The sun had started dipping behind the trees, painting everything in amber light, but I didn't notice the beauty of it. I sat on a bench under the oak trees and stared at the ground, trying to breathe past the knot in my throat. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the betrayal. Denise had torn open something private, something raw, and paraded it around like a badge of honor. She had dragged my parents into it too, shaming them in front of everyone when they had done nothing but love me through my worst moments. I thought about my mom's face when Denise revealed the debt she'd helped me through, how her lips had parted in shock, how her eyes had darted toward me in silent apology. I thought about my dad's chair scraping back as he'd tried to intervene, only to be drowned out by Denise's smug voice. They didn't deserve that. None of us did. The weight of it all came crashing down at once. My chest ached, my stomach churned, and I felt hollow. A failure. Exactly what Denise had painted me as. I thought about all the times I had tried to claw my way forward. Late nights juggling 2 jobs, weekends spent studying certifications, sacrifices nobody in that pavilion knew about. None of it seemed to matter now. Denise's words had drowned out years of effort in less than 5 minutes. I stayed out there for a long time, long enough that the smell of apple pie and ice cream drifted faintly on the wind, long enough to hear the squeals of kids as they packed up their water balloons for the day. Nobody came looking for me. Maybe they didn't notice I was gone. Or maybe they did and thought I needed space. Either way, I was alone. When I finally worked up the courage to walk back toward the pavilion, most of the family had begun packing up. Coolers were being lugged to cars, folding chairs stacked, leftover trays covered with foil. Denise was near the center, laughing as she helped wrap up food, acting as though nothing had happened. That, somehow, cut deeper than her cruelty. The ease with which she moved on, like she hadn't just dismantled me in front of everyone. I kept my head down as I helped my parents load our dishes into the trunk. They didn't say much, but I could feel the heaviness hanging between us. My mom finally reached out and squeezed my shoulder, her touch light but steady. "Don't let her words define you," she whispered. I nodded, but I couldn't answer. My throat was too tight. The car ride home was silent. Streetlights flicked on one by one as we drove, casting fleeting shadows across the dashboard. I stared out the window, replaying every moment, every laugh, every sympathetic glance. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I felt like a shell of myself. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and sat in the dark, letting the weight settle. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about how Denise had framed me, how she had branded me in the eyes of everyone present. I imagined the stories she'd tell afterward, the way she'd twist the knife even deeper when she recounted poor Lucas at future gatherings. For a while, the despair felt endless, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to cry, to disappear. But somewhere in the stillness of those hours, my mind began to shift. It was subtle at first, just the faintest spark of defiance. The thought that maybe this didn't have to be the end of the story. Maybe Denise's attempt to humiliate me could be the very thing that set something else in motion. By dawn, as the first light crept through my curtains, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let it go. Not this time. She had crossed too many lines, dragged my parents through the mud, and branded me as a failure for sport. If I stayed quiet, if I accepted it, she'd only grow bolder. She'd make it her tradition to break me down at every reunion. So I made a decision. I would suffer quietly for now, play the role she thought I'd been boxed into. But beneath the surface, I'd start planning. Carefully, patiently. Because the one thing Denise never considered was that the person she thought was the weakest in the room might also be the one most willing to wait for the perfect moment. And as I sat there in the silence of my room, staring at the faint glow of morning, I realized something that made me sit up straighter. Denise hadn't just humiliated me. She had given me exactly the weapon I needed, her own arrogance, her need to control the narrative. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when. But I promised myself, the next time the family gathered, the smile on her face would be the first one to vanish. In the weeks after the reunion, I carried Denise's words with me like a stone in my pocket. Heavy, unshakable, but also strangely grounding. Every time I started to feel the old doubt creep in, I'd hear her sneer echo in my head. Still working odd jobs, still trying to figure it out. It hurt, but it also lit a fire under me. For years, I'd been slowly, quietly putting one foot in front of the other. But now it felt like I had something bigger to prove, not just to her, but to myself. The first step was small. I'd been studying for a professional certification for months, but had always found an excuse to delay the exam. Not ready yet, I'd tell myself. Too busy this week. But the morning after the reunion, I sat at my desk, logged in, and registered for the earliest available test date. No more hiding, no more waiting. I studied harder than ever, late nights with coffee and textbooks, flashcards scattered across my desk like fallen leaves. By the time the exam day came, I wasn't just ready, I was determined. And when the results came back showing I had passed with one of the highest scores in my testing center, I felt something crack open inside me. It wasn't just relief. It was power. That certification unlocked a door. Within 2 months, I'd landed interviews at companies I'd only dreamed about before. I walked into those rooms with a quiet confidence, no longer weighed down by the narrative Denise had tried to saddle me with. When I finally got the job offer, a solid salary, benefits, and room to grow, I sat in my car outside the office and let out a laugh I hadn't heard from myself in years. My parents were the first people I told. My mom cried, hugging me so tightly I could feel her pride in every heartbeat. My dad, normally reserved, clapped me on the back with a grin that lingered all night. For the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel like their son, I felt like someone they could brag about. With the new job came new stability. I moved into a nicer apartment, one with sunlight that poured through the windows in the morning and space enough for me to finally breathe. I traded in my old car for something reliable and sleek, not extravagant, but enough to make me smile every time I turned the key. Week by week, the life Denise had mocked me for lacking began to take shape. But it wasn't just about money or material things. It was about the way I carried myself. I noticed it when I walked into a meeting at work and people actually listened when I spoke. I noticed it when I reconnected with an old friend, and they said, "You seem different, more sure of yourself." And I noticed it most when I thought about the next reunion. Instead of dread, I felt anticipation. Not for the confrontation itself, but for the chance to show up as someone Denise couldn't dismiss so easily. Still, I kept quiet. I didn't broadcast my achievements on social media, didn't call up cousins to brag. I wanted Denise to believe she still had me pegged. I wanted her to walk into that next gathering smug and unprepared. Because the sweetest revenge isn't loud, it's patient. The months rolled by, and with each one, my confidence grew. I earned praise from my manager, even got tapped to lead a small team on a new project. The kind of responsibility that came with trust, the kind Denise always said I lacked. At night, I'd sometimes catch myself imagining the look on her face when she realized the failure she mocked had climbed further than she ever thought possible. But I didn't just focus on work. I started taking care of myself in other ways too. I hit the gym regularly, not obsessively, but enough to feel stronger and healthier. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned, like playing guitar and sketching, and found joy in the things that made me feel whole again. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. And then, one evening, I got a call that set the next phase in motion. It was my uncle, the same one who'd handed Denise the microphone at the reunion. He invited me to the next family gathering, a smaller one this time, at his house. "It won't be as big as the reunion," he said, "but you should come. It'll be good to see you." For a moment, my stomach clenched, remembering the humiliation of the last time. But then I looked around my apartment, the framed certificate on the wall, the work laptop on my desk, the steady paycheck stubs stacked neatly in a drawer, and I realized I wasn't the same person who had walked into that pavilion months ago. This time, I had something Denise couldn't strip away. And as I hung up the phone, I felt it. The tide was turning. Slowly, steadily, I was rising. And Denise? She had no idea the ground beneath her was already beginning to shift. The invitation to my uncle's smaller gathering sat on my kitchen counter for days, like a test I wasn't sure I was ready to take. Every time I walked past it, I felt the echo of that reunion. Denise's sneer, her voice booming into the mic, the pitying glances from relatives. But alongside that memory was something new, a steadiness in my chest that hadn't been there before. I wasn't the same Lucas she thought she'd humiliated into silence. I had changed, and now I was starting to realize I had more leverage than I ever imagined. The night before the gathering, I stayed up late finishing a report for work. My team's project, one I'd been asked to lead just months into the job, was going to be presented to the executives the following week. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes, and for the first time, it struck me. I was in a position now where people listened to me, respected me, trusted me with responsibility. I wasn't between opportunities anymore. I had climbed higher than Denise would ever believe. And then something happened that would turn my quiet rise into the perfect setup for revenge. It started innocently enough, a conversation with my cousin Rebecca. She called me a few days before the gathering, catching up like we hadn't since the reunion. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly. "I should have said something when Aunt Denise went after you. It wasn't fair." I told her not to worry about it, that I understood why no one wanted to jump into the fire. But then she hesitated and lowered her voice. "Lucas, I don't know if you know this, but Aunt Denise has been talking about you. A lot. Not just at the reunion. She's been spinning stories, saying you're still unemployed, still mooching off your parents, that you're a burden." The words made my jaw tighten, but I kept listening. Rebecca went on. "She even told some people you borrowed money from her once and never paid it back." That stopped me cold. "What? That's not true." "I know," Rebecca said quickly, "but she's been repeating it like it is. She loves making herself look like the martyr, you know? Like she's the one holding the family together while everyone else falls short." I sat there in silence, anger simmering low and steady. Not only had Denise humiliated me in public, she'd continued to smear me behind my back, fabricating stories to reinforce the narrative she wanted everyone to believe. That wasn't just petty, it was calculated. And in that moment, something inside me shifted again. If she wanted to play with lies, fine. I had something she didn't, the truth. And the truth, paired with the position I was in now, could become a blade sharp enough to cut through every facade she had built. The next week at work, that thought stayed with me. I was surrounded by people who valued facts, numbers, results, proof. And proof was exactly what I could gather. I dug into old bank records, emails, documents, anything that painted the real story of the years she loved to weaponize against me. Not only did I have clear evidence that I'd never borrowed a dime from Denise, but I also had records of the money I'd repaid my parents, every installment carefully logged. My past wasn't perfect, but it wasn't hers to distort, and I suddenly realized just how powerful it would be to hold up the receipts, literally, when the time was right. But the setup didn't stop there. At the office, my manager pulled me aside after a presentation and said, "You've got a knack for this, Lucas. You should consider applying for the open supervisor position. You're already doing the work." My heart thudded. A promotion already? I hadn't expected it so soon, but the possibility planted itself firmly in my mind. If it happened, it would give me even more stability, more presence, more undeniable proof that I wasn't who Denise said I was. Meanwhile, Rebecca and I started talking more often. She wasn't just sympathetic. She was angry at how Denise treated me. "She's always been like this," Rebecca admitted one evening. "She builds herself up by tearing others down. But the family only lets her because no one wants to cross her." That sentence echoed in my head. No one wanted to cross her. That was the secret to Denise's power, fear. She had cultivated it for years, throwing her weight around, humiliating whoever she pleased, and everyone else chose silence to keep the peace. But peace bought at the price of truth was nothing but control. I realized then that I didn't just want to clear my name. I wanted to break that pattern. I wanted to show everyone that Denise wasn't untouchable, that her power was built on smoke and mirrors. The gathering at my uncle's was just days away, and as I stood in front of my bathroom mirror the morning of, adjusting the collar of my freshly pressed shirt, I felt something I hadn't before any family event. Anticipation. Not the anxious, stomach-churning kind, but the focused, deliberate kind. I was walking in with proof, with stability, with success that no amount of Denise's lies could erase. And for the first time, I wasn't going to let her dictate the story, because Denise had given me the perfect setup without even realizing it. Her arrogance, her lies, her hunger for control, it had all painted a target on her back. And I was the one holding the bow. The morning of my uncle's gathering, I woke up with that peculiar stillness that comes before a storm. Not the kind of storm that tears through with violence and chaos, but the kind that rolls in slow, deliberate, inevitable. I ironed my shirt, polished my shoes, and tucked a slim folder into my bag before leaving the apartment. Inside that folder were printouts of bank statements, repayment records, and work documents, receipts for every lie Denise had ever spun. I didn't know if I'd use them, but just knowing I had them gave me a sense of armor. When I arrived at my uncle's house, the atmosphere was smaller, more intimate than the reunion. No massive pavilion, no PA system, just cousins lounging on the deck, aunts and uncles milling around the kitchen, and kids racing through the backyard with sparklers, even though it was still daylight. I took a breath before stepping inside, reminding myself of one simple truth. I wasn't here as the family scapegoat anymore. I was here as someone in control. Of course, Denise spotted me almost immediately. She was by the kitchen island, wine glass in hand, holding court with a couple of relatives who were nodding along as she told some story. Her eyes flicked toward me, narrowed for a second, then curved into that familiar smile, the one that said she already thought she had the upper hand. "Well, look who decided to show up again," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the room. A few heads turned. I smiled calmly, stepping into the kitchen. "Good to see you too, Aunt Denise," I said evenly, my tone polite, measured. She wasn't expecting that. Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "I was just telling everyone how resilient you are," she said, with that syrupy tone she used when her words carried hidden barbs. "Even when life keeps knocking you down, you still come around. Admirable, really." A ripple of laughter followed, though this time it was weaker, less sure. I noticed the hesitation, like some of them were beginning to question whether joining her chorus was worth it. That was my first sign the ground beneath her was shifting. I didn't take the bait. I simply set down the bottle of wine I'd brought as a gift and joined a group at the table. I could feel her watching me, waiting for the old Lucas, the one who would shrink, flush red, and let her words hang heavy in the air. But I didn't. I talked easily with my cousins, asked about their lives, even cracked a joke or two. For the first time, I felt the balance tilting. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. After dinner, my uncle suggested we all share updates, just like at the reunion, but without the microphone. "It's nice to hear what everyone's been up to," he said. People nodded, and the circle of conversation began. Rebecca talked about grad school. Eric mentioned his promotion again. Others chimed in with small milestones, new jobs, new houses, engagements. Then Denise leaned back in her chair and, as if on cue, said, "And what about Lucas? Surely he's got something to share. Or maybe not much has changed since last time." The air tightened. I could feel the room collectively brace itself, waiting for me to stammer or retreat. But instead, I smiled calmly and said, "Actually, quite a lot has changed." I spoke clearly, steadily, not bragging, not defensive, just factual. I told them about passing my certification exam, about my new job, about leading a team at work, and the upcoming project I'd be presenting to executives. I mentioned moving into my new apartment, about the stability I'd built piece by piece. The words weren't boastful. They were measured, confident, undeniable. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment, and then my uncle clapped his hands. "That's fantastic, Lucas," he said warmly. Others chimed in with congratulations, genuine this time, not the polite nods of pity I'd gotten months before. My mom smiled, her eyes shining, and my dad gave me the kind of proud nod I'd waited years to see. But the best part was Denise's face. Her smile had frozen in place, brittle and strained, like a mask cracking at the edges. She hadn't expected this. She had built her entire narrative around the idea that I was stagnant, dependent, the family's perpetual disappointment. And here I was, calmly dismantling that story in front of everyone, replacing it with the truth. Still, she tried to claw it back. "Well, that's nice," she said with a forced laugh. "But I suppose we'll see how long it lasts this time. After all, some of us remember the debts, the setbacks." That was when I pulled the folder from my bag. I placed it on the table, sliding it toward her with a quiet precision that made every head turn. "Funny you mentioned that, Aunt Denise," I said softly, "because I've heard you've been telling people I borrowed money from you and never paid it back, and that I'm still living off my parents. Since you seem so interested in my finances, I thought I'd bring some clarity." I opened the folder and spread out the documents. Bank records, repayment schedules, letters of clearance. Cold, hard proof that her stories were lies. As you can see, I continued, keeping my voice calm. I've repaid every cent my parents ever lent me. And as for you, well, since I've never borrowed money from you, there was nothing to repay in the first place. The silence that followed was electric. Denise's face flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Eyes darted from the papers to her, then back to me. Rebecca leaned forward, reading one of the statements, and then looked up with raised brows. "It's all right here," she said simply. The shift was immediate. For years, Denise had thrived on the family's silence, on their willingness to take her words at face value. But now, for the first time, she was caught, exposed, and the room knew it. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands calmly. I just wanted to clear that up, since we're all about honesty in this family. And then I let the silence hang, giving her no escape, no clever retort to mask the truth. It was in that silence, in the way the family looked at her with new eyes, that I knew the revenge had landed. Not with shouting, not with anger, but with precision, with proof, with undeniable calm. And as Denise squirmed in her chair, cheeks burning, I felt something settle in me that had been absent for years. Control. The silence after I laid the papers on the table stretched longer than I ever could have imagined. No one rushed to fill it with nervous laughter this time. No one looked away to protect Denise from embarrassment. For once, all eyes were on her, not in admiration, not in compliance, but in cold, unflinching scrutiny. Denise shifted in her chair, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. Her face flushed crimson, and for the first time in my life, I saw her at a loss for words. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then gave a brittle laugh that cracked halfway through. "Well, I was only joking," she stammered, waving a hand at the documents like they were trivial. "Families exaggerate. You know how it is." But no one laughed with her. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice sharp. "It wasn't a joke when you told me he owed you money. It wasn't a joke when you called him a burden." Eric spoke next, surprising me. "You've been doing this for years, Aunt Denise. Always tearing people down. Maybe it's time you stopped." The weight of their words crushed her attempt at recovery. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, but found none. Even her husband sat stiffly beside her, staring down at his plate as though he wanted no part in the mess she'd made. For once, the performance was over. My uncle cleared his throat, his voice firm. "Denise, enough. We don't need this kind of poison in the family anymore." His tone carried finality, a kind of authority that silenced even the faintest murmur. Denise sputtered, rising to her feet. "Oh, so now I'm the villain? After everything I've done for this family?" Her voice cracked on the last word, desperation creeping in. She turned toward the door, muttering, "You're all ungrateful," before storming out of the room. The slam of the screen door echoed through the house like a gavel striking wood. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. My dad nodded, his jaw tight, but his expression proud. Slowly, conversations resumed, but the tone was different. Warmer, more genuine. People asked me about my job, about my apartment, about what I wanted to do next. Not out of pity, but out of curiosity, out of respect. For the first time, I wasn't the family's running joke. I was simply part of the circle, no longer diminished by Denise's shadow. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Rebecca hugged me tightly. "She'll never forgive you," she said softly, almost with a laugh. "But that's her problem now." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "She doesn't have to forgive me. She just has to live with the truth." When I stepped outside into the cool night air, the stars stretched wide above me, and for the first time since that awful reunion, I felt free. Denise's power had always been built on lies, on the family's silence. But the moment the truth came into the light, her kingdom crumbled. And as I walked to my car, I realized something I would carry with me forever. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't fire or fury. It's calm, undeniable proof, delivered at the perfect moment. The last image that stays with me isn't Denise storming out, red-faced and sputtering. It's the way the family looked at me after, the shift in their eyes, the recognition that I wasn't who she said I was. And that was enough. Because in the end, the smile I erased wasn't just hers. It was the smug grin she'd worn for years, the one built on my silence. And that night, for the first time, it was gone. My name's Jake, I'm 27, and I never thought I'd be the kind of person writing something like this. For most of my life, I've been the quiet one in my family, the one who went along with things, kept my head down, and didn't argue too much. My parents always had strong personalities, and my older brother thrived under their attention. I, on the other hand, learned early on that it was easier to stay in the background. That dynamic carried through my entire childhood, into high school, and even into adulthood. I wasn't mistreated outright, but I always felt like I didn't quite measure up, like I was just tolerated. The only person who ever made me feel truly seen was my uncle, my dad's younger brother. Uncle Rob was different, laid back, funny, and somehow always knew exactly when I needed someone to talk to. He lived out by the coast, in this gorgeous old beach house that had been in his possession for decades. As a kid, summers at that house were the highlight of my year. While my parents were usually too busy with work or focused on my brother's achievements, Uncle Rob would take me fishing, teach me how to surf, or sit with me on the deck while the sun went down, talking about life. When I got older, we stayed close. Even as I went through college, started working odd jobs, and struggled to figure out my place, he never made me feel like I wasn't enough. He believed in me in a way my parents never did. So when he passed away suddenly, it hit me harder than I expected. Losing him felt like losing the one person in my family who had ever been firmly in my corner. What I didn't expect was what came next. At the reading of his will, it turned out that Uncle Rob had left me his beach house. Not my parents. Not my brother. Me. A place valued at over $1 million. For the first time in my life, I had something that was mine, not because I fought for it, but because someone I loved trusted me enough to give it. My parents' reaction at that meeting should have been a warning, but I tried not to see it at first. They smiled and congratulated me in front of the lawyer, but there was this flicker in their eyes, something sharp, calculating, like they were already thinking about how to make it theirs. I brushed it off, told myself I was imagining things, that they were just surprised. But that uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. A few days after the will reading, my mom called me and asked, in that overly sweet tone she used when she wanted something, if I'd thought about what I was going to do with the place. I told her honestly that I wasn't sure yet, that I wanted to take some time to decide. She said things like, well, houses like that are hard to manage, and wouldn't it be better to let us handle it for you? I laughed it off, thinking it was just her way of overstepping, but when I hung up, my stomach twisted. That was the first hint of disrespect, the first sign that maybe they weren't going to let this go as easily as I hoped. I tried to push it to the back of my mind, but something in me, maybe all those years of being overshadowed, told me I had to be careful this time. Uncle Rob hadn't just left me a house. He'd left me something that could change my life. I wasn't about to let anyone take it away. And then, a week later, they showed up at the beach house. Not to visit, not to reminisce. They walked in with smug looks on their faces, my dad carrying a folder, and my mom grinning like she'd just won a prize. That's when my dad said the words that made my blood run cold. We had the deed transferred. You're out by Friday. I just sat there, stunned, staring at them. The confidence in their voices, the certainty, the way they looked at me like I was some kid who had no say. For a moment, it was like I was 10 years old again, being told what to do and having no choice. But this time, I wasn't 10. I was 27, and something in me snapped. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about the house. It was about years of them dismissing me, overlooking me, deciding for me. And for the first time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I smiled. Just a small one. And for the first time in my life, they didn't seem so sure of themselves. I didn't argue with them right then. I think that's what threw them off the most. My dad had this whole speech lined up. I could see it in the way he straightened his shoulders, waiting for me to protest. My mom tilted her head like she was about to start lecturing. But I didn't say a word. I just leaned back in the chair at the kitchen table, folded my arms, and gave them that small smile again. Jake, my dad finally said, a touch of impatience breaking through his calm tone. This is what's best for the family. You don't know the first thing about maintaining property like this. It's complicated. Insurance, taxes, renovations. Your mother and I can handle it. We already started the paperwork. Buyers are lined up. You'll get something out of it too. The way he said it, something, like tossing scraps to a dog. My chest burned, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. I'll think about it, I told him, standing up and walking them toward the door. Mom touched my arm as she passed, giving me that fake sweet smile again. Don't take this the wrong way, honey. It's not that we don't trust you. It's just, you've never been responsible with big things. Remember when you sold your old car for half of what it was worth? Or when you dropped out of grad school? This is too important for you to mess up. Every word was a reminder of all the times they'd kept a mental scoreboard of my so-called failures. Never mind the fact that I'd been working 2 jobs at the time, trying to keep myself afloat while they bailed my brother out of his 5th failed business venture. When they finally left, their words hung in the air. For years, I'd believed those criticisms, believed that maybe they were right about me being the failure. But standing in that beach house, surrounded by Uncle Rob's photographs and surfboards, I realized how wrong they were. I wasn't incompetent. I'd just never been trusted with anything of real value before. And now I had something that mattered. The next week was tense. They called every other day with new suggestions. My dad sent me links to real estate agents, telling me which ones he thought I should use. Mom dropped by with grocery bags, pretending she was just being helpful, but slipping in lines like, "It's such a big place for one person, don't you think?" My brother even called me, something he hadn't done in months, saying, "Mom and Dad told me about the house. You know, if you're overwhelmed, I can take it off your hands. I'll even let you stay in the guest room if you want." I laughed bitterly after that call. He said it like he was doing me a favor. The same brother they'd bought a new car for while telling me there wasn't enough money to help me with rent during college. The same brother who'd gotten a loan from them to start a bar that failed within a year, but who they still called ambitious while I was directionless. The favoritism was so blatant it hurt. Every time I replayed their words, I felt myself sink deeper into a mix of anger and determination. Uncle Rob had chosen me, not them. He saw something in me they never bothered to look for. And I wasn't about to let them rewrite his decision. But the more I pushed back, politely, quietly, the more aggressive they became. One evening, they showed up unannounced again. I was on the porch, watching the waves, when their car pulled up. My dad marched up the steps, holding a folder stuffed with papers. "Jake," he said firmly, "we've been patient. We've already filed the transfer. You're out by Friday. This is happening. Don't embarrass yourself fighting it." My mom stood behind him, arms crossed, lips curved in that satisfied little smirk she wore whenever she thought she'd won. "It's for your own good, sweetheart," she chimed in. "We're saving you from making a huge mistake." That was the breaking point for me. They weren't just trying to take the house. They were trying to make me believe I couldn't handle it, the same way they always had. I felt my fists clench, but instead of yelling, I forced myself to breathe. I opened the screen door, looked them both in the eye, and simply said, "We'll see." Then I shut the door. Inside, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to their control, I was planning. They thought they'd already won, that I'd roll over like I always had. But they didn't know that a week before, I'd already moved the house into a trust Uncle Rob's lawyer had helped me set up. They had no idea the deed wasn't even in my name anymore. I leaned against the wall, smiling to myself as I heard their footsteps retreat down the porch. They thought I was the same old Jake, the kid who never pushed back. They were in for a shock. But the real tension began 2 days later, when they returned, this time with strangers. 2 days later, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. I figured it was just my parents again, back for another round of "we know best." But when I stepped out onto the porch, I froze. They hadn't just come back. They'd brought people with them. 2 sharply dressed men and a woman were walking up the steps behind my parents, holding clipboards and folders. Real estate agents. Buyers. My dad waved like he was welcoming them to his house. My mom was practically glowing, her arm linked with his as though this was some victory lap. "Jake," my dad called, his voice booming with false cheer. "Come out and meet the folks who are going to take great care of this place." I stood there, gripping the wooden railing of the porch so tightly my knuckles went white. "Excuse me. This is the Simmons family," my mom said, her tone dripping with smugness. "They've been looking for a property just like this. Isn't it wonderful, honey? You won't have to worry about a thing. They'll pay top dollar, and you'll get a nice little sum out of it. Enough for a small condo somewhere more realistic for you." The buyers smiled politely, clearly sensing the tension, But my parents carried on as though I wasn't even standing there. My dad opened the folder and pulled out papers, flipping through them with an air of authority. "We've got everything ready for closing. Just a few signatures, and this can be wrapped up quickly." It was like being a ghost in my own life. My own parents, standing on my uncle's porch, talking over me, treating me like a bystander in something that was mine. All those years of being pushed aside, dismissed, told I wasn't capable, they all crashed down on me at once. My chest felt tight, my throat burned, but I couldn't let them see me break. The buyers stepped inside with my parents leading the way, as if they already owned the place. I followed them into the living room, where Uncle Rob's surfboard still leaned against the wall and his old record player sat in the corner. My mom gestured around the room like she was giving a tour. "It's such a charming space, isn't it? With just a bit of updating, it'll be perfect for your family gatherings." Her words sliced through me. She was erasing me, from the very place he had left for me. My dad added, "And the deck out back? Amazing view, perfect for parties. Jake never really uses it, so you'll make better use of it anyway." Something snapped. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. "This isn't your house to sell," I said firmly, my voice louder than I intended. Everyone stopped. My parents turned to me, faces full of annoyance rather than shame. Dad's jaw tightened. "Don't be childish, Jake. We already told you. We filed the transfer. This is happening whether you like it or not." Mom shook her head, her expression full of that infuriating pity she always reserved for me. "Sweetheart, you'll thank us later. You're not cut out for something like this. We're protecting you from yourself." And that was the betrayal. Not just that they were trying to sell the house behind my back, but that they were stripping away my choice, my autonomy, the last piece of my uncle I had left. They didn't just want the house. They wanted to remind me I'd never have control, not even over my own life. I forced myself to steady my voice, even as my hands shook. "You're making a mistake." They laughed. Actually laughed. My mom turned back to the buyers. "Ignore him. He's just overwhelmed. He'll come around once it's all finalized." I felt my pulse hammering, but beneath the anger, something cold settled in me. A clarity. They thought they'd already won, that I was powerless, that I'd fold like I always had. But they had no idea that while they were busy plotting behind my back, I'd already made sure this house was untouchable. I stayed quiet as they finished their little tour, biting my tongue until I tasted iron. My silence made them smugger, more careless, more certain of their victory. The buyers shook hands with my dad, promising to be in touch. My parents walked them out like proud hosts. And then, just as the car pulled away, my dad turned to me with a smirk I'll never forget. "You're out by Friday, Jake. Don't drag this out. It's done." I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just gave them that same smile I'd worn before, calm and almost amused. Inside, though, my resolve solidified. This wasn't just about standing my ground. It was about finally proving them wrong. They wanted to treat me like the weak one, the irresponsible one. But they had no idea the storm I was about to bring down on them. And in that moment, as they strutted back to their car, I knew the betrayal had gone too far to forgive. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was war. After that day, everything shifted. I couldn't unsee the smugness on their faces, the way my parents paraded strangers through the living room like I was just some squatter they were waiting to evict. The betrayal clung to me like salt in the air, seeping into every thought. For the next week, they doubled down. Calls, texts, unannounced visits. It was relentless. My dad would send me messages with dates and times for showings as though I had no say in it. My mom would leave voicemails dripping with condescension. "Honey, the movers are booked for Friday. Pack your essentials, and we'll help with the rest. You'll feel so much lighter once this is behind you." I tried to tune them out, but the pressure seeped into everything. I couldn't even enjoy the beach anymore. The deck, once my place of peace, became a stage where I half expected to see cars pulling in every time I sat down. Their shadow was everywhere, pressing me into a corner. The worst part was the doubts they stirred up. At night, lying in Uncle Rob's old bedroom, I'd hear their words looping in my head. "You're not responsible. You've never managed anything this big. You'll thank us later." My chest would tighten, and I'd wonder, what if they were right? What if I was clinging to something too big for me? Bills piled on the kitchen counter, utilities, property taxes, things Uncle Rob had handled without me realizing the weight of it. I stared at those numbers, my heart racing. I had some savings, sure, but nowhere near enough to float me for long. Every envelope felt like evidence for their case against me. Then came the lowest blow. One afternoon, I came home from a grocery run to find the locks on the front door had been changed. My keys didn't fit. My groceries slipped out of my arms, crashing onto the porch as I stared in disbelief. A note was taped to the door in my dad's neat handwriting. "Jake, this is for your own good. We'll talk soon." I sat on the steps, groceries at my feet, staring at that note until the sun went down. The weight of it all crushed me. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd finally won. Maybe I'd never be strong enough to stand up to them. That night, I slept in my car, parked down by the dunes. The ocean roared in the distance, and I felt like I'd been cast out of my own life. My uncle's house, the one place where I'd ever felt chosen, was locked away from me. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling of the car, something shifted. My parents had always counted on me folding. That was their playbook: pressure, shame, and a reminder of my supposed failures until I caved. But this time, something felt different. They hadn't just taken control. They'd crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I remembered the meeting with Uncle Rob's lawyer, the paperwork we'd signed, the careful words about protecting the property from potential disputes. I thought about the trust, how it wasn't just an idea, but something already in place. My parents thought they'd locked me out, but the truth was they were the ones standing on sand. In that car, with the sound of the waves crashing like a heartbeat, I made a quiet decision. I wouldn't fight them head on. Not yet. I'd let them think I was beaten, let them believe they'd stripped me down to nothing. Because the more confident they became, the harder the fall would be. The next morning, I picked up my phone and called Uncle Rob's lawyer. My voice was steady when I said, "It's time." That day marked the bottom of the pit for me. I was shut out, humiliated, stripped of dignity. But underneath the wreckage, a spark had caught fire. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting, I was planning. I'll never forget the expression on the lawyer's face when I walked into his office the next morning. His name was Mr. Harlan, a sharp, gray-haired man who had known Uncle Rob for years. He didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, it was as though he'd been expecting this moment. "Jake," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I take it things with your parents are escalating." I sat down, exhaustion weighing heavy on me, but there was a steadiness in my voice I hadn't felt before. "They changed the locks." His brow furrowed. "On a property that legally isn't even in your name anymore." He tapped the file on his desk. "Good thing we moved quickly. The trust has already been filed with the county. They can parade buyers all they like, but they don't have the authority to sell something that doesn't belong to them." The words should have been comforting, but what struck me more was the certainty in his tone. For the first time since this all began, someone was on my side with proof, not just sympathy. Mr. Harlan explained the layers of protection Uncle Rob had insisted on. The house wasn't simply mine. It belonged to the trust, overseen by Mr. Harlan himself as trustee. No single person, not even me, could make rash decisions about selling it. Uncle Rob had thought ahead, as though he knew my parents would try something like this. Walking out of that office, I felt a weight lift. My parents thought they'd cornered me, but they were standing on thin ice, completely oblivious. For once, I held the real power, and I didn't need to shout to prove it. The days that followed were strangely calm for me, even as my parents ramped up their efforts. They hosted another showing, this time with 3 different buyers. I knew because one of the neighbors texted me, whispering about the crowd on the porch. Instead of panicking, I stayed where I was, at a small cafe in town, sipping coffee while flipping through listings for part-time jobs. I decided that if I wanted to protect this house long-term, I needed stability of my own. No more drifting from one odd job to the next. It wasn't glamorous, but I landed a position working for a local property management company. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was suddenly in the business of maintaining homes, the very thing my parents claimed I couldn't handle. At first, I just did basic admin tasks, but I paid attention, absorbing everything: tenant contracts, repair logistics, tax filings. Every day felt like a small step out of the shadow I'd lived in for so long. With each paycheck, I set aside money. It wasn't much, but it was mine, earned without their interference. And each evening, after work, I'd drive back to the beach house, even if I couldn't go inside yet. I'd park nearby and sit on the sand, staring at the silhouette of the place against the sunset. It reminded me what I was working toward. Meanwhile, The town wasn't blind to what was happening. Uncle Rob had been well liked, and word spread quickly that his house had been left to me. The neighbor who had texted me, Mrs. Whitaker, started waving whenever she saw me on the beach. One evening, she came over with a tin of cookies. "Your uncle was proud of you," she said softly, pressing the tin into my hands. "Don't let them take that from you." Her words bolstered me in ways I didn't expect. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about stepping into the kind of man Uncle Rob believed I could be. Over the next month, my footing grew firmer. At work, I gained enough trust that my boss let me oversee a couple of small rental properties on my own. It felt surreal handling lease agreements, scheduling repairs, making decisions. The kind of responsibility my parents always said I'd fumble, I was now managing daily. And the thing was, I wasn't fumbling. I was thriving. The more I succeeded quietly, the less their voices rattled in my head. Their calls went unanswered. Their notes, slipped under the beach house door, went unread. Every time they tried to push, I pushed back by doing nothing, because I didn't need to. They were walking deeper into a trap they didn't even realize existed. But then came the turning point, the moment when the rise stopped being subtle. It was a Thursday afternoon when I got the call from Mr. Harlan. "Jake," he said, his voice tinged with dry amusement, "your parents have filed paperwork to finalize a sale. They've scheduled a meeting with the buyers for next week." My heart raced, but this time not from fear. "So what happens now?" "That's where it gets interesting," he replied. "Because next week, we'll be there too. And they won't be expecting us." For the first time in my life, I felt something new when I thought about my parents. Not dread, not guilt, power. I wasn't the weak link anymore. I was the storm on the horizon, waiting to break. And as I hung up the phone, a smile crept across my face. They thought they were about to win. They had no idea their empire of control was built on sand. The week leading up to that meeting was the longest of my life, but also the most focused I had ever been. For once, I wasn't flailing or reacting to whatever disaster my parents dropped in my lap. I was preparing. Every day after work, I sat with Mr. Harlan in his office, going over the trust documents line by line. He explained things in his calm, lawyerly way, but beneath the legal jargon was a clear truth. My parents had no ground to stand on. Uncle Rob had been deliberate. The trust wasn't just airtight, it was reinforced. The house belonged to the trust, with me as the beneficiary, and no outside party could alter or sell it without the trustee's approval. And that trustee wasn't me. It was Mr. Harlan himself. My parents thought I was a soft target, but the truth was, Uncle Rob had already built me a fortress. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Mr. Harlan leaned back in his chair and gave me a rare smile. "You know, Jake, your uncle told me something before he passed. He said you'd need time to find your strength, but once you did, you'd surprise everyone, including yourself." Those words sank deep. For so long, I'd carried around the image my parents had painted of me. Unreliable, weak, incapable. But here was proof that someone who knew me, really knew me, believed the opposite. It felt like a torch being passed into my hands. At work, too, things were shifting. My boss, seeing how quickly I was learning, offered me a bigger role, handling client communication for new property owners. It wasn't glamorous, but it meant trust, authority, and the kind of experience that turned into real opportunities. I even started to imagine a future in this field, something steady, something I could build for myself. The kind of life my parents never pictured for me. Meanwhile, my parents kept calling, leaving increasingly urgent messages. My dad's tone turned sharper. "You're wasting time, Jake. This sale is happening whether you like it or not." My mom switched tactics, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Sweetheart, you're making this so hard on yourself. If you just cooperate, we can all move on." I didn't answer. Not once. Instead, I let them think they'd won. I let them pour all their energy into the illusion of control. I wanted them overconfident, certain that I was beaten, so that when the ground disappeared beneath them, the shock would be total. Then, just 3 days before the scheduled meeting, Mr. Harlan showed me something that made my chest tighten with both nerves and exhilaration: the official deed filings. In black and white, stamped and signed, was the proof that the house had been secured in the trust weeks earlier. My name wasn't even on the deed anymore. It was beyond their reach. "Bring this with you," he said, sliding the folder across the desk. "When the time comes, you won't need to say much." The papers will speak for themselves. I carried that folder home like it was made of gold. Sitting on the beach that night, I opened it again and again, running my fingers over the seal, the signatures, the proof that, for the first time, I wasn't powerless. But I also knew this wasn't just about legality. This was about history, decades of being overlooked, pushed aside, and belittled. This meeting wasn't just going to end their scheme. It was going to end the story they'd been telling about me my whole life. The night before, I stood outside the locked beach house, staring up at the windows glowing in the moonlight. It hurt, knowing my parents were inside, probably congratulating themselves on their victory. But instead of bitterness, I felt a strange calm. They didn't know that tomorrow, everything would change. For the first time, I wasn't scared of them. I was ready. The morning of the meeting, I woke up before dawn. My hands should have been shaking, but instead, there was a strange calm in me, like the nerves had burned themselves out, leaving only resolve. I dressed simply, button-down shirt and slacks, nothing flashy. I didn't want to look like I was trying to prove something. I wanted to look like what I was, prepared. Mr. Harlan met me outside the county offices, carrying his briefcase like it was an extension of himself. He gave me a nod, the kind that said everything without words. We're ready. When we walked into the conference room, my parents were already there, sitting side by side with a real estate agent and two buyers. My mom's face lit up with smug delight the moment she saw me. My dad leaned back in his chair, arms folded, like a king waiting for his subject to beg. "Jake," he said smoothly, "glad you could make it. We're finalizing everything today. You'll sign, collect your share, and this nonsense will finally be over." I didn't sit right away. Instead, I set the folder on the table and slid into the chair across from them. Mr. Harlan sat beside me, expression unreadable, but his presence was enough to make my mom's smile falter just slightly. The real estate agent cleared her throat, clearly eager to move forward. "So, Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell have assured us they are the rightful owners, and all we need today are signatures to proceed." Mr. Harlan leaned forward, his voice calm but cutting. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. The Caldwells," he nodded toward my parents, "are not, nor have they ever been, the rightful owners of this property." The room went still. My dad's smirk wavered. "What are you talking about? We filed the transfer weeks ago. This is our house now." That's when Mr. Harlan opened his briefcase, pulling out the documents with deliberate slowness. He laid them on the table, one by one, until the trust papers and deeds sat in plain view. The property in question was placed into an irrevocable trust prior to any such attempts. As trustee, I can confirm that the Caldwells have no legal authority to sell, transfer, or otherwise tamper with it. The sole beneficiary is Jake Caldwell. I watched my parents' faces drain of color as the words settled in. My mom blinked rapidly, her lips parting like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. My dad leaned forward, grabbing at the papers, only for Mr. Harlan to slide them just out of reach. "This is ridiculous," my dad snapped, his voice cracking. We talked to the county clerk. We filed the paperwork." Mr. Harlan's calm never wavered. "You filed forged paperwork, which, I should remind you, is a felony. And given that the house was never legally in your possession to begin with, your efforts are meaningless. The trust overrides everything." The buyers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them cleared his throat. "So, you mean this sale isn't valid?" "Correct," Mr. Harlan said. "There is no sale. There never was." I finally spoke, my voice steady, even though inside I felt like I was standing on a cliff edge. "You tried to lock me out of the house. You told me I was out by Friday. You paraded strangers through a home that wasn't yours to sell. And the whole time, you thought I'd just roll over like always." I looked at them, really looked at them, and for once, I didn't feel small under their gaze. "But Uncle Rob didn't leave the house to you. He left it to me, because he knew I'd take care of it. And I did what you never expected. I protected it." My mom's face crumpled, somewhere between anger and panic. "Jake, you don't understand. We were just trying to help. You would have ruined it, like you always ruin everything." That line, the same refrain they'd used all my life, didn't sting this time. It almost made me laugh. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch, then said quietly, "We'll see who ruined what." The buyers stood, muttering apologies about wasted time, and left the room. The real estate agent followed, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. And then it was just us, the four of us, and the truth spread out on the table. My dad's voice was low, shaking with fury. You think you've won, but you're still nothing without us. Mr. Harlan closed the folder with a sharp snap. On the contrary, Mr. Caldwell, what I see here is a young man standing on his own 2 feet, while the two of you scramble in the dirt. If you pursue this further, you'll only dig your hole deeper. My advice: walk away. I didn't need to say another word. My silence, my calm, was enough. For the first time, I had the control, and they knew it. But this wasn't the end, because the fallout of that meeting was about to shake everything. The silence in that room stretched like a taut rope. My mom's eyes darted between me and Mr. Harlan, desperate for a foothold, while my dad's jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. For the first time in my life, I saw it. The moment they realized they'd lost. Not just the house, not just this scheme, but me. Mr. Harlan stood and gathered the papers back into his briefcase with deliberate care. I'll be filing a formal notice with the court regarding the attempted forgery. If you're wise, you'll leave this matter alone. Any further interference will only make things worse for you. His words landed like gavel strikes. My mom finally snapped, her voice shrill. Jake, how could you do this to us? We're your parents. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. I met her gaze and, for once, didn't look away. Everything you've done for me. My voice stayed calm, steady. You took my savings to cover my brother's failures. You dismissed every choice I ever made because it wasn't what you wanted. You tried to steal the one thing my uncle entrusted to me. That isn't love. That isn't support. That's control. And I'm done with it. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. My dad slammed his fist on the table, trying to reclaim some authority. You'll regret this, Jake. You think you can cut us out? You're nothing without family. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table, my voice low but clear. I already have a family. Uncle Rob was my family. The neighbors who look out for me, they're my family. The people who believe in me are my family. And you, I shook my head slowly. You're just strangers who share my last name. The color drained from his face. We walked out of that room, leaving them sitting in stunned silence. Mr. Harlan patted my shoulder as we stepped into the sunlight. Your uncle would be proud, he said simply. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread quickly. Word of what they'd tried to do reached the neighbors, the community, even a few of their friends. Whispers of fraud and betrayal clung to them wherever they went. My dad's reputation at work, where he prided himself on being seen as trustworthy, took a hit he couldn't repair. My mom, who thrived on social circles and appearances, found herself quietly uninvited from gatherings she used to host. They tried calling me, of course, at first with fury, then with guilt, and finally with silence. I never answered. Meanwhile, life moved forward. I worked harder at my job, saved steadily, and little by little, I made the beach house my own again. I changed the locks, not out of spite, but because I was finally the one choosing who belonged inside. I planted flowers out front, repainted the deck, and every evening I'd sit there as the sun set, the same way I used to with Uncle Rob. But now, I wasn't just the kid who needed someone else to believe in him. I was the man who had finally learned to believe in himself. One evening, as the waves crashed and the sky turned gold, I whispered into the salt air, I kept it safe, Uncle, just like you knew I would. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a shadow in someone else's story. I felt like the author of my own. The house was mine. My life was mine. And my parents, well, they were just ghosts fading in the distance. My name's Cale, I'm 25, and I guess if you asked my family, they'd call me the other son. That's not a nickname. It's basically how I've been referred to for the last decade, ever since my younger brother Ryan decided to be perfect. He's the golden boy, captain of the varsity soccer team, full ride to a top university, and the kind of guy who somehow makes everyone around him feel like a supporting character in the Ryan show. I used to think I was being petty for feeling second best, but after what happened at his graduation party, let's just say I stopped pretending. To understand how we got there, you have to go back a bit. I was never a bad kid. Average grades, quiet, respectful. I liked sketching, coding, and volunteering at the animal shelter on weekends. But I wasn't loud about it, and I never gave big speeches at the dinner table like Ryan. I didn't win trophies, and I didn't care about impressing anyone, which, apparently, meant I didn't matter. My parents never outright said it, but you feel it when they look through you to praise someone else. When your accomplishments are met with silence, or worse, a passive, "That's nice, honey." But when Ryan got a B plus on a midterm, they were posting about it like he'd cured cancer. It got worse in high school. Ryan was 2 years behind me, but even before he caught up, the comparison started. My mom would bring up his test scores before mine even hit the fridge. My dad once told me, and I'll never forget this: "Not everyone's meant to shine, Kale. Maybe Ryan's just got that extra something." That stuck with me, like I was the warm-up act for the main performance. I moved out when I turned 19, took a remote IT job, saved up, and rented a small apartment across the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I didn't ask them for anything, not a dollar. Meanwhile, Ryan got a brand new car the moment he passed his driver's test, and somehow convinced them to pay half his tuition despite that full scholarship. I didn't say a word. I kept my distance, showed up for holidays, smiled through the tight family dinners, and kept the peace. But deep down, the resentment grew. Not jealousy, just hurt, and a kind of disbelief that they could so easily toss one kid aside while polishing the other like a trophy. Which brings us to the party. It was held at some country club just outside town. White tablecloths, rented DJ, a tiered cake with "Congratulations, Ryan," piped in perfect blue icing. I got the invite 2 weeks before, a generic text from my mom that read, "Hope you can come." It would mean a lot. I knew that wasn't true. I knew it was just so they could say they invited me. But still, I showed up. I always did. Maybe part of me hoped they'd notice. Maybe part of me still craved that. When I got there, the place was packed. All our relatives, his friends, some of his professors, even a few neighbors I hadn't seen in years. I stood near the bar, sipping on ginger ale, while people floated past me like I was a potted plant. A few offered the polite, "Oh wow, you're Kale, right?" But they didn't stick around. Everyone was there for Ryan. Then came the toast. My dad clinked his glass, the crowd hushed, and he stood at the center of the dance floor with his arm around Ryan's shoulder. He smiled wide, proud, chest out. "To the child who actually made us proud," he said. The room laughed, not a loud laugh, more like a ripple of polite agreement. A few people clapped. My aunt raised her glass and said, "Good thing we didn't waste money throwing one for you, Kale." Another round of chuckles. I smiled, nodded, even raised my glass. But inside, my hands were trembling. My mom, always more subtle, just sipped her wine and added, "Some kids are just disappointments. That's life." Like it wasn't a direct hit. Like it wasn't poison wrapped in silk. I stood there still. I felt my jaw clench. I looked around and realized no one flinched. No one said a thing. No one found it cruel. To them, it was all just true. And that's when I felt something shift. I didn't say a word. Just walked out into the hallway, leaned against the wallpapered wall, and took a few deep breaths. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket and turned it over in my hand. I had debated bringing it. I'd prepared it weeks ago, a compilation of videos, photos, screenshots, even audio. But I hadn't planned to use it. I thought, maybe I wouldn't need to. That maybe, by showing up, I could be enough. But the thing about being invisible for long enough? Eventually, you stop asking to be seen, and you make damn sure they have to look. Back in the main hall, the DJ was fumbling with the slideshow setup. I walked over, calm, and said, "Hey, mind if I check the file? My mom asked me to help with it earlier." He shrugged, handed me the laptop. One click. I ejected the USB already in there, slipped in mine, renamed the file, walked away. I sat back down with my drink. Waited. Let them pile back in. Let them clap and cheer as the lights dimmed and the screen flickered to life. At first, it looked normal. Baby pictures. Ryan in a high chair. Ryan playing soccer. Ryan with cake on his face. Then it changed. The next photo was from a birthday when I was 12. Me alone at a table, a single cupcake in front of me. No balloons. No guests. I hadn't remembered that photo existed, but there it was. The caption beneath read, "Forgotten, again." Another slide. Ryan's new car. Then a screenshot of the bank transfer my parents made to help him buy it. Next to a photo of the secondhand bike I used for 3 years, chain rusted, seat torn. Whisper started. Then came the side-by-side of my high school graduation. Me standing alone in front of the school sign, versus Ryan's, where they'd rented out an entire venue. I watched their faces twist. Then audio. A voicemail. My mom's voice. "Kale, we just don't think it's a good idea for you to come to Thanksgiving this year. Ryan's friends will be there. And, well, It might be awkward. Slide after slide. Message after message. Photos. Emails. Comments. Years of quiet neglect lined up in perfect, undeniable order. And then, just as the room reached a boiling silence, the screen went black. I stood. I wasn't angry. I wasn't yelling. I just picked up my glass and walked slowly to the center of the floor. Their faces were pale. My dad looked like someone had poured ice water down his back. My mom's hand hovered near her wine glass, trembling slightly. Ryan. Ryan just stared, and I smiled. The silence that followed the slideshow was suffocating. You could have heard a fork drop. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone near the back awkwardly coughed. The DJ looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. The lights came back up slowly, like even they were hesitant to reveal everyone's faces. I scanned the room, taking it all in. Shocked expressions, some horrified, some curious, a few looking at me with something close to respect. Or maybe it was guilt. My mother's wine glass was still halfway to her lips. She hadn't blinked. My dad's jaw was clenched, arms crossed tight. Like if he didn't move, the moment wouldn't be real. Ryan. Well, Ryan just looked confused. Like someone had rewritten his version of reality mid-sentence. I walked to the front of the room slowly, calm, my heart thudding but steady. I didn't rush. I wanted every single step to echo. I didn't take the microphone. I didn't need it. I was going to sit through this, I said, voice clear and calm. I really was. I came here thinking maybe tonight would be different. That maybe, just once, I'd hear something kind. Or at the very least, be treated like I existed. My aunt shifted uncomfortably in her seat. My cousin lowered her eyes. But then I heard the toast. And I realized I wasn't here as a guest. I was here as the punchline. I turned toward my dad. I've spent years wondering what I did wrong. Why I didn't measure up. Why you could look at one son and beam with pride, and look at the other like he was a clerical error. But tonight, I stopped wondering. Because I finally realized it was never about me. It was about you. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. No, you've talked enough. All of you have. I looked at my mom next. You know what hurts the most? It's not even the insults. It's the way you made it sound like my existence was an inconvenience. Like loving me was some extra effort you just couldn't be bothered to make. She looked like she'd been slapped. I turned to the crowd, my voice still steady. You all laughed. You clapped. Some of you even joined in. But let me ask, if I had gotten up and said those things about Ryan, would you have laughed then? Nobody answered. Just silence. I didn't come here to ruin the night. But I also didn't come here to be humiliated. Again, I've stayed quiet for a long time. Too long. I thought maybe if I kept showing up, kept proving myself, you'd see me. But now I see that the problem wasn't me. It was that I was never what you wanted me to be. And I'm done chasing something that doesn't exist. I walked to the table where the gifts were stacked, dozens of envelopes, cards, wrapped boxes with metallic ribbons. I scanned until I saw mine, the thick white envelope I had slid in earlier. I picked it up, held it in my hand for a moment, then calmly tore it down the middle. Clean. No hesitation. I tossed the pieces on the table. You don't need my gift, I said quietly. You already gave yourselves enough. And with that, I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, voices started to rise. Hushed murmurs, a few gasps. I heard my cousin whisper, "Did he just?" I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I made it halfway across the parking lot before I finally let the tears fall. Not because I was sad. Not really. But because for the first time in years, I finally felt free. My phone buzzed just as I reached my car. It was Ryan. What was that? Why did you do that? You embarrassed everyone. You embarrassed me. I stared at the message for a second, then typed back. Imagine how that felt. For the last 10 years. I hit send, then blocked his number. And then, just when I thought the night was over, my phone rang again. This time, a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was low, nervous. Kale? Hey, it's Aunt Meredith. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was that bad. I should have, her voice cracked. I should have said something earlier. Can we talk? And that's when it hit me. That maybe this wasn't just about revenge. Maybe this was about finally being heard. But not everyone was calling to apologize. The next morning, my mom posted a status that read, "Some people just don't understand what it means to be part of a family. You try your best, and they still find a way to shame you." The comments were split. Some defending her. Some asking questions. A few linking the slideshow that, apparently, someone had recorded and posted online. It had gone viral. And that was only the beginning. The video spread faster than I ever could have imagined. By noon the next day, I was getting texts from people I hadn't spoken to since high school. Former classmates, neighbors, even a girl I'd barely known who wrote, "I always thought something was off with your parents." Watching that, wow, I'm so sorry. I didn't even know how they got my number. It was like someone had opened a valve, and all the years of pressure I'd buried just came flooding out. Not just from me, but from the people who had seen the way I was treated and never said a word. Now they had. It had started with a single Reddit post from someone who'd been at the party. I don't know who, but they wrote this long rant titled, "I just witnessed the most savage graduation revenge in real life." They described everything. The slideshow, the quotes, the torn envelope, even paraphrased what I'd said. Within hours, someone else posted the video footage in the comments. And then someone shared it to Twitter. And then TikTok. I couldn't open an app without seeing my face, frozen on the screen as I stood in front of my family, staring them down like a ghost come back to haunt them. I hadn't planned on any of this. I didn't want internet fame. I just wanted my family to see me, but now the whole world had. Ryan was the first to break the silence. Not to me, he posted on Instagram. A picture of him at the party, smiling with the cake behind him, captioned, "Even the best nights have their drama. Keep shining anyway." The comments were a mess. Half of them were still oblivious. People from his school saying things like, "Proud of you, bro," and ignore the haters. But the rest they knew. People were linking the video, quoting my mom's voice from the audio clips, and asking him why he'd never stood up for his brother. One person wrote, "Imagine watching your parents humiliate your sibling for years and doing nothing but smile for the camera." He turned off comments by the end of the day. And then my mom called. I stared at the screen for a long time before I answered. Part of me didn't want to, but a bigger part of me needed to know what she'd say, needed to hear it, whatever it was. Her voice was tight, clipped, like she'd been crying, but didn't want me to know. "Kale," she started, "I don't even know where to begin." "Maybe try with an apology," I said. I didn't yell. I didn't snap. I just said it plainly, like I was asking her to pass the salt. She hesitated. "You blindsided us. That was supposed to be Ryan's night." I was blindsided. I cut in. Every birthday, every holiday, every time you made me feel like I didn't belong in my own house. I sat through years of being ignored, mocked, and pushed aside. And you want to talk about one slideshow? More silence. Then a sniffle. "It wasn't meant to come off that way. You've always been different. Harder to connect with." I almost laughed. "You mean harder to brag about? That's not fair." "No. What's not fair is watching your brother get rewarded for existing while you have to beg just to be noticed. You think this is about a party?" That was the tip of the iceberg. Her voice cracked again. "You made us look like monsters. You made yourselves look like monsters." I just held up the mirror. She didn't say anything for a long time. I heard her breathing, slow and shaky. Then, finally, in the smallest voice I'd ever heard from her, "What do you want from us, Kale?" I leaned back against my couch, stared at the ceiling. "Honestly, I wanted you to care. But now, I think I just want peace." I ended the call before she could respond. That night, I got another call. This time from someone I didn't expect, my uncle, Eric. He lived in Oregon, barely came to family events, kind of the black sheep of the extended clan. He was the one who'd given me my first sketchbook when I was 8. I hadn't heard from him in years. "Kid," he said, voice warm and amused, "you blew the damn roof off." I laughed, the tension in my chest finally cracking. "Didn't think you'd seen it." "Oh, I saw it. Everyone saw it. I've been texting your mom for days, telling her for years she was treating you like wallpaper. But she always said you were just quiet. Glad you finally made some noise." We talked for 2 hours. About everything. About family. About how he'd been pushed out for being too weird. An artist who didn't marry young, didn't work in finance, didn't go to church every Sunday. He told me I reminded him of himself, that he was proud of me, that if I ever wanted a break from all the chaos, I was welcome to come stay with him, clear my head, get some fresh air. I cried after that call. The kind of tears that sneak up on you when someone finally says what you've been dying to hear for years. The days passed. More texts, more posts. Some friends unfollowed me. Others reached out, said they'd always thought I was the quiet one, but now they realized I was just drowned out. And then the job offer came. It wasn't from a family member. It was from someone who had seen the video and happened to be the creative director of a nonprofit that worked with underserved youth, kids who felt forgotten. They said they needed someone who understood what that was like, someone who could build something meaningful from that pain. They wanted me. And just when I thought I'd finally broken free of the family drama, a letter showed up in my mailbox. No return address, just my name, written in tight, neat handwriting. Inside, an invitation to Ryan's second graduation party, an intimate family-only gathering. Let's heal. And right beneath that, in my father's handwriting, please don't bring a USB this time. I sat with the letter in my lap for nearly an hour, just staring at it. No return address, no RSVP instructions, just a single, quiet plea scrawled in my dad's handwriting. Please don't bring a USB this time. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel. Regret? Closure? Curiosity? My hands didn't shake when I read it, not like they used to when I got messages from them. I didn't feel anger anymore either, just a kind of dull ache, like pressing on a bruise you've lived with for so long it barely stings anymore. I folded the letter once, tucked it back into the envelope, and left it on the kitchen counter. 2 days later, I called Uncle Eric. I got an invitation, I said. To what? Ryan's redemption party, he said with a chuckle. Something like that. You thinking about going? I paused. I don't know. There was a silence on the line. Then he said, if you're going to go, kid, go on your terms. Don't go to appease them. Go because you have something to say. I thought about that. I packed my overnight bag the next morning. The party was being held at our old family house, the one I hadn't stepped foot in for nearly 5 years. I pulled into the driveway just before sunset. Everything looked the same. The paint was still chipped on the shutters. The porch light flickered like it always did. The wind chimes Mom had bought from a flea market 10 years ago still hung by the door, tangled and rusting. I knocked once. No one answered. I turned the knob and stepped in. The air smelled like candles and old wood. Inside, the living room had been rearranged, with folding chairs and streamers draped clumsily across the archways. Congratulations again, Ryan. Banner hung crooked above the fireplace. There were only about 10 people, just close family this time. My parents, a few aunts and uncles, 1 or 2 cousins, and Ryan. He was wearing a soft blue dress shirt, sleeves rolled, like he was trying to look casual and polished at the same time. He turned when he saw me, surprised, like he hadn't actually expected I'd show. Kale, he said, you came. Apparently I'm family, I said, and walked past him. My mom came over quickly. She looked more tired than I remembered. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes were red-rimmed, like she hadn't slept right in days. I'm glad you came, she said quietly. We were hoping for a fresh start. I didn't respond. Not yet. My dad kept his distance, standing near the drinks table like he was guarding it. His mouth was a firm line. I could tell he hadn't agreed with inviting me, or maybe he was just waiting for something to go wrong. They ushered everyone into the dining room soon after, a long table crammed with mismatched chairs. They'd made spaghetti, garlic bread, and salad, the default, we're trying meal. My mom insisted I sit next to her. Ryan was at the head of the table, of course. The conversation was hollow. People made nervous small talk about traffic, the weather, someone's new dog. No one dared bring up the slideshow or the aftermath. The elephant in the room wasn't just present. It was tap dancing across the lasagna. About 20 minutes in, Ryan stood up and clinked his glass. Can I say something? Everyone looked up. I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. And to my brother, he said, glancing at me. I know the last party didn't go how we wanted, but I'm glad you came tonight. Really. He lifted his glass. Everyone followed. I lifted mine too, barely. And, he added, I want to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize how bad it was for you. I guess I was just caught up in being the one they leaned on. But that doesn't mean it was right. A few people murmured awkward agreement. My mom wiped at the corner of her eye, as if even this half-hearted acknowledgement was some great act of courage. I stayed seated. I didn't clap. I just looked at him. And then I stood up. I'm glad you said that, I said, because I have something to say too. My mom tensed. My dad set his wine glass down a little too hard. I didn't come here to fight, I said. I came here because you asked me to. Because I thought maybe, this family could finally act like a family. I scanned their faces. But I'm not going to pretend that one dinner erases everything. I turned toward my parents. You made me feel small for most of my life. Not once did you stand up for me. Not once did you apologize when I was left out, ignored, mocked at your table. You let it happen. Worse, you encouraged it. My dad opened his mouth. No, I said, sharper now. You don't get to interrupt. You raised a golden child, and you left the other one in the shadows. That wasn't an accident. That was a choice. I turned to Ryan. And you? You saw it happen every day? You didn't just benefit from it. You thrived in it. You made sure you stayed the center of attention because you liked it there. And even now, you're apologizing like it's some casual inconvenience. Like this was about a party. It wasn't. It was about being treated like I didn't exist. The room was frozen. But I do exist, I said, my voice steady. And I'm not angry anymore. I'm not here to make you feel guilty. I'm here to say, I'm done. I'm done begging to be seen. I'm done showing up so I can be dismissed all over again. I came tonight so I could say this to your faces. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small card. This is my new number, I said, placing it on the table. If you want to actually be in my life, on my terms, you'll use it. If not, I'm okay with that too. I took one last look around the table. My mom's lip trembled. My dad looked like he'd bitten down on glass. Ryan just looked stunned. I walked out. It wasn't dramatic. No one chased after me. No one screamed or begged or threw a drink. It was quiet, final, and more powerful than anything I could have planned. When I got to my car, I sat behind the wheel for a long time, just breathing. The night air was cool against my face. The windows fogged slightly. My heart, which had been pounding through my chest, finally began to settle. I didn't cry this time. 2 weeks passed. No calls. No texts. Not even a voicemail. I was okay with that. I started a new position at the nonprofit. They gave me a corner desk with a plant and a little brass nameplate. I led my first group of students, kids who'd been forgotten by their own families, who lit up when someone just remembered their name. I saw pieces of myself in each one of them, and for the first time, I knew exactly where I belonged. Then, one afternoon, I got a letter. No return address again. I opened it cautiously. It was a photo from the party. I was standing at the head of the table, holding my glass. The moment right before I'd spoken. I hadn't seen anyone take it. On the back, in familiar handwriting. Thank you for not bringing a USB this time. You brought something louder. Dad. No apology. No call. But I smiled anyway. Because I didn't need it. They had heard me. And that was enough. My name's Daniel. I'm 34, and until last month I thought I understood my family. I'm not saying we were perfect. Far from it. But I always assumed there was some invisible line of respect none of us would cross. That illusion shattered the day of my father's funeral. We'd just buried him, and the whole family had gathered at my mother's house for the traditional post-service lunch. People were milling around, talking quietly, the smell of coffee and roasted lamb filling the air. I was still in that dazed, foggy state you get when you've been holding yourself together all morning, focusing on making sure mom was okay, greeting relatives, thanking people for coming. My father's absence hadn't truly sunk in yet. It was like he was just in the next room and would walk out any moment. Then my brother Mark decided it was the perfect time to drop a bomb. Mark is 38, and we've never been especially close. Growing up, he was the golden child. Dad gave him more chances than I could count. Even after he failed out of 2 different colleges and burned through every job opportunity Dad ever handed him. I, on the other hand, learned early that if I wanted something, I'd have to build it myself. At 23, I started my own carpentry and custom furniture business with a rusty van, some secondhand tools, and a lot of sleepless nights. Over the last decade, it's grown into a thriving company with 10 employees, 2 showrooms, and a waiting list of customers. My father was proud of me, but he never offered me handouts, probably because I never asked. Mark, though, Mark has always believed he was entitled to whatever I had. It started with small things, borrowing tools without returning them, bringing his car into my workshop for a quick fix that somehow always required my guys to drop what they were doing for half a day. I put up with it for years, partly because I didn't want to fight, and partly because Dad would always say, "He's your brother, Daniel. Help him out." But lately, Mark had been circling like a shark. He'd make these casual comments at family dinners. When Dad's gone, we'll run the business together, as if that was just an accepted fact. I always brushed it off. So when he suddenly banged his fist on the dining room table that afternoon, in front of the whole family, it jolted me out of my grief. The room went quiet except for the clinking of a few coffee cups. "Dad promised me half of your business," he said, his voice loud and shaky. "So hand over the keys now." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. But then he reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He waved it in my face like it was a winning lottery ticket. "I have it in writing," he added, grinning like a man who'd just cornered his prey. I remember staring at him, my brain scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. Part of me wanted to laugh right there, because the whole thing was so absurd. My father was meticulous about business matters. If he'd wanted Mark to have any share in my company, it would have been written into my own legal documents, not scribbled on some mystery sheet Mark had pulled from his pocket. But another part of me, well, it was furious. Not because I thought he could actually take my business, but because of the timing. We had just buried our father. My mother was sitting across the table, her eyes red and swollen. And Mark, my own brother, was using this moment, this day, to stake some imaginary claim to something I'd built from scratch. Mom tried to interject, telling him to lower his voice, but he cut her off. "This is between me and Daniel," he said, his jaw tight. "Dad told me I'd get my share when the time came. And the time's come." A few of my aunts and uncles exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. I could feel all eyes on me, waiting to see if I'd argue, shout, maybe even give in just to avoid a scene. But I didn't do any of those things. I just sat back in my chair, watching him. Inside, my mind was already ticking over, cataloging everything. The fake confidence in his tone, the way his hand shook slightly as he held the paper, the smug little smirk when he thought he'd trapped me. The truth was, my father had left me something before he died, something Mark clearly didn't know about. And in that moment, as I fought to keep my expression neutral, I realized I might just let him keep talking. Because the more rope he gave himself, the more satisfying it would be when it finally tightened. That was the first crack in the ground between us. But it was about to open into something much, much deeper. I didn't answer Mark right away. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and took a slow sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch. He clearly expected me to explode or start bargaining, and the fact that I didn't seem to make him uneasy. But Mark has never been good at letting things go. He doubled down. "Look," he said, sliding the paper across the table toward me. "Dad signed this. He said he wanted us to run the place together. You've had your fun being the boss for 10 years. Now it's time I get my share." I glanced at the paper but didn't touch it. It was handwritten in blue ink, dated a little over a year ago, with a shaky signature that barely resembled my father's neat cursive. No letterhead, no witness, no legal format. Just a few sentences about splitting ownership and family legacy. It looked like something Mark had drafted himself after a couple of beers. But what caught my attention wasn't the document. It was the fact that my father's name had been misspelled in one spot. My own brother hadn't even noticed. Before I could say anything, Mom's sister, Aunt Grace, chimed in. "Well, if that's what your father wanted." Her voice trailed off, but the implication hung there. Grace had always been one of Mark's quiet cheerleaders, excusing his behavior, brushing off his failures as bad luck. I felt my stomach tighten. The last thing I needed was a family tribunal right after burying my father. Mark sensed he had backup and pushed harder. "You know, Dad always said you were lucky," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You got the brains, the drive. I got nothing." And he felt bad about that. He told me this business would be my fresh start. "And frankly, you owe me. You wouldn't have even started without the tools Dad gave you." That last part made my jaw clench. Yes, Dad had given me a few tools at the start, but they were the same old rusted ones Mark had abandoned in the garage after one of his short-lived business ventures. I'd been the one who repaired them, maintained them, and bought new ones with my own money. The idea that my entire success was somehow a debt I owed to Mark was laughable, but it also revealed just how deeply he believed in his own victim narrative. The rest of the afternoon only got worse. When Mom tried to serve dessert, Mark followed me into the kitchen, cornering me while the others chatted in the dining room. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice, "I'm not unreasonable. If you don't want to hand over the keys right now, fine. But I want to start coming into the shop. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. I'll have my own office, front window, of course. You can keep running the day-to-day, but big decisions go through me. That way we ease into it." He said it like he was offering me a generous compromise, like I should be grateful. I just stared at him, wondering if he genuinely believed he could walk into a business he knew nothing about and start approving my decisions. My employees would eat him alive before the first coffee break. But before I could answer, my cousin Rebecca walked in, overhearing just enough to raise an eyebrow. "You're seriously trying to take his company?" she asked. Mark smirked and replied, "Not take. Inherit. There's a difference." Word spread fast. Within an hour, the whispers around the living room had shifted from condolences to speculation. I caught snippets. "Well, if it's in writing, and family businesses are meant to be shared." It was like my years of work were being reframed as some sort of community property, up for grabs, because my last name matched his. And the worst part? Mom stayed quiet. She didn't defend me, didn't clarify the truth, didn't say, "Daniel built that himself." She just sat in her chair, sipping tea, looking tired. By the time guests started leaving, Mark had made sure to shake every hand and mention, in an oh-so-casual tone, "Big changes coming to the business. I'll be stepping in soon." Some people congratulated him. Others shot me uncertain looks, probably wondering if they'd just witnessed the opening scene of a messy family implosion. That night, I went home and sat in my office long after midnight, replaying the day in my head. The grief I'd been feeling all week was still there, but now it was tangled with something else, a slow-burning anger. This wasn't just about my business. It was about the fact that Mark had chosen that day, of all days, to stake his claim. He'd made my father's funeral into his personal land grab, and judging by the way he'd strutted around the house, he thought he'd already won. I didn't know exactly how I'd respond yet, but I did know one thing. Mark had just turned this into a war he wasn't ready for. 3 days later, I was back at the shop, trying to drown myself in work. Sawdust in the air, the hum of the table saw, the smell of freshly cut oak. It usually centered me. But that week, every time I paused, my mind drifted back to Mark's smug face at the funeral. I was drafting an order for a client when my foreman, Luis, walked into my office holding an envelope. "This came for you," he said. No return address, just my name written in thick black marker. Inside was a photocopy of that same so-called agreement Mark had waved in my face. Only this time, it was attached to a letter from a lawyer. According to the letter, Mark was formally notifying me of his legal claim to half of the company and would be asserting his rights immediately. My stomach sank when I read the last line. "Effective Monday, my client will arrive at the business premises to assume his rightful role as co-owner." I wanted to laugh, but it came out more like a growl. A legal claim? Over a handwritten, misspelled note? It was so absurd, I almost tossed the letter in the trash right then. But what really stung wasn't the paper. It was that Mark had actually gone this far. This wasn't just him running his mouth in the heat of the moment. He'd sat down, called a lawyer, and taken a step toward trying to force his way into my life's work. That afternoon, I drove to my mother's house, hoping to get some clarity, maybe even a hint that she'd tell him to back down. When I pulled into the driveway, Mark's car was already there. Inside, I found him in the living room with Mom, leaning back on the couch like he owned the place. They were drinking coffee, and there was a neat stack of papers on the table in front of them. "Perfect timing," Mark said, without even looking up from his cup. "We were just discussing how to make this transition smooth for everyone." I blinked. "Transition?" Mom sighed and gave me this weary look. "Daniel, maybe it's time to think about the bigger picture. Your father always wanted you boys to work together. Mark's been through a lot. This could be good for the family." My chest went cold. "You're siding with him?" "Over me." She shook her head. "It's not about sides. It's about unity. Mark deserves a chance. And," she hesitated, glancing at him before continuing, "we've already discussed some changes." That's when Mark slid a folder toward me. Inside was a draft of a press release. A press release. It announced that Mark had joined the company as co-owner and would be bringing fresh leadership and innovation. There was even a photo of him standing in front of my showroom, taken that morning without my knowledge. I looked up at him, my pulse pounding. "You broke into my shop?" "Didn't break in," he said, grinning. "Mom had the spare key. I just wanted a few photos for the announcement. No big deal." I turned to Mom, and she didn't meet my eyes. That was the moment it hit me. She'd given him the key. My own mother had handed over access to my business without asking, without even warning me. Mark leaned back, smug as ever. "Face it, Daniel. This is happening. You can make it easy or you can make it ugly." Something inside me shifted right then. Up until that moment, I'd been juggling grief and frustration, trying to hold the family together despite everything. But this was a line they couldn't uncross. It wasn't just about greed anymore. It was betrayal, plain and sharp. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the papers. I just gathered them up, put them back in the folder, and stood. "All right," I said quietly. "If that's how you want it." Mark smirked, thinking he'd just won some silent surrender. But he had no idea that in that moment, I'd stopped playing defense. The next week was one of the hardest of my life. True to his word, Mark showed up at my shop on Monday morning, 10 minutes before opening. He wore a brand new leather jacket and carried a shiny briefcase that I'm pretty sure was empty. Without asking, he strolled straight past the front counter, into my office, and plopped down in the chair across from my desk like it was his own. "I'll need a set of keys," he said, pulling out a notepad. "And let's go over the books. I want to see what kind of mess I'm inheriting." I could feel my employees watching from the doorway, pretending to be busy while eavesdropping. I didn't want to start a shouting match in front of them, so I kept my voice even. "You're not getting access to the books." He smirked. "We'll see what the lawyer says about that." Then he spent the rest of the morning wandering around the shop, asking pointless questions, suggesting improvements, like putting a soda machine in the showroom and interrupting my guys while they worked. By lunchtime, production had slowed to a crawl. The days that followed were even worse. Mark came in 3 times that week, each time acting more entitled. He'd tell customers he was the new co-owner, make promises about discounts without my approval, and try to schedule meetings with suppliers. One afternoon, I caught him in the stockroom on the phone with one of my biggest clients, pitching them on some new direction he thought we should take. That client called me later, confused and concerned, asking if my company was going through changes. I felt the damage spreading like a crack in glass. My crew was on edge, unsure who to take orders from. I started getting whispers from other business owners in town, people asking if it was true that my brother had taken over. Even my accountant called, worried about rumors she'd heard. At home, it wasn't any better. My mother, who'd once been my quiet supporter, had started parroting Mark's lines about family unity and Dad's wishes. Every phone call with her ended with some variation of, "You're being too stubborn. This is what your father wanted." It was exhausting, and I could feel my grief for my dad getting tangled up with something darker, resentment, even toward her. One night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my office staring at the framed photo of me and Dad from the day I opened the shop. He had his arm around me, both of us grinning like fools, sawdust in our hair. He'd been so proud that I'd built something from the ground up, and now my own family was trying to hollow it out from the inside. I was losing sleep. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about Mark walking around my shop, touching things that weren't his, telling my clients half-truths. For the first time in years, I considered selling the business. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't imagine dragging this fight out forever. But somewhere in that exhaustion, something started to crystallize. If I kept reacting to Mark, I'd always be a step behind. I needed to shift the ground under his feet entirely. Quietly, I began making notes. Not about how to kick him out in the moment, but about how to make sure he could never, ever get his hands on my business again. I didn't tell a soul. Not my crew, not my friends, not even Rebecca, my cousin who'd clearly seen through him at the funeral. Outwardly, I played along, kept my tone calm, even humored some of his nonsense. But inside, I was building something. Not a wall, not a defense, something sharper. Because if Mark wanted to turn my father's death into his opportunity, I was going to turn his ambition into his downfall. I started by pulling back from the day-to-day chaos just enough to see the bigger picture. Mark was loud and brash, but he was also predictable. He wanted to be seen as the man in charge. All I had to do was give him just enough rope to feel secure, while I quietly fortified every part of my business behind the scenes. The first step was meeting with my lawyer, my real lawyer, the one who had been with me since the early days. We went over my incorporation documents, shareholder agreements, and every legal safeguard I already had in place. My lawyer smiled when I slid Mark's agreement across the desk. "Daniel, this wouldn't hold up for 2 minutes in court," he said, tapping the misspelled name. "It's not notarized, not witnessed, and it's vague enough to be meaningless. If anything, it looks like your brother might be committing fraud." That gave me the first deep breath I'd taken in weeks. But we didn't stop there. We rewrote certain clauses in my operating agreement, adjusted ownership protections, and even filed updated records with the state. Moves that quietly made it impossible for anyone, especially Mark, to gain access without my consent. Meanwhile, I poured my energy into the business itself. I took on a high-profile custom job for a luxury hotel downtown, a massive lobby installation that would put our name on the map in a whole new way. I didn't tell Mark about it. Instead, I arranged everything directly with the hotel's management, under a strict confidentiality agreement. When the contract was signed, it was worth more than any single order we'd ever had. While that project moved forward, I made another calculated move. I started networking harder than ever. Every week, I attended local business association meetings, charity galas, and trade shows. I wasn't just shaking hands. I was strengthening alliances. Suppliers who'd once just been friendly acquaintances became loyal partners. Other shop owners began referring clients to me. I even landed a segment on the local morning news, showing off a custom dining set I'd made for a charity auction. Mark, of course, tried to claim credit for some of this when he caught wind of it. "I've been talking to people," he'd say smugly. Words getting out about the changes we're making. I'd just nod, biting back a smile, knowing that none of what I was doing actually involved him. By the end of that quarter, our sales had jumped 25%. The hotel job had generated a buzz that was drawing in new clients by the week. My employees, who had been tense and wary, started to relax again once they realized I still held the real authority. Quietly, I gave out bonuses, thanking them for sticking through the recent family turbulence. And while Mark strutted around, thinking he was slowly sliding into control, I was building a safety net so wide and strong that even if he tried to burn the whole place down, it would only singe his own reputation. The more I rose, the more he seemed convinced I was doing it for him, that this growth was proof of his leadership. That arrogance kept him from seeing the real game being played, and that was exactly how I wanted it. What he didn't know was that I'd already set the stage for a moment that would pull the rug out from under him in a way he wouldn't recover from. The turning point came on a Wednesday morning in early spring. I was in the middle of a design consultation with a new client when Luis knocked on my office door, looking uneasy. "You might want to see this," he said, holding out his phone. On the screen was a public Facebook post from Mark, one I'm sure he thought was harmless bragging. It was a picture of him in a suit, standing in my showroom again, this time with a caption, "Excited to announce I'm now co-owner of the family business. Big things ahead." He'd tagged half the county, including several of my suppliers and clients. But that wasn't what caught my attention. In the background of the photo, partially visible on my desk, was a folder, one I recognized immediately. It was from the hotel project. He'd been snooping. At first, my pulse spiked with anger, but then I noticed something else. In the comments under his post, one of my competitors, someone who'd tried to underbid me on past contracts, had written, "Congrats. Let's meet soon. I've got an offer for you." And Mark had replied, "Absolutely. Let's talk partnership." That was my opening. I started digging, not just into Mark's social media, but into his entire history of business ventures. I remembered the landscaping company he'd tanked in under 6 months, the failed sports bar idea that left him in debt, the multi-level marketing scheme he'd once tried to rope the family into. In every single case, he'd taken shortcuts, ignored advice, and left someone else to clean up the mess. And now, armed with my company's credibility, he was lining himself up to do it again. Except this time, his failure could drag my reputation down with him. I also found something else. That competitor he'd been messaging? I happened to know from my networking events that they were currently under investigation for shady accounting practices. I hadn't said a word publicly, but it was common knowledge among certain circles that getting too close to them was career suicide. That's when the plan fully took shape in my head. If Mark wanted to parade around as a co-owner, I was going to let him, just long enough for him to walk himself right into the trap he was setting. I wouldn't have to fabricate anything. All I had to do was give him the space to make the kind of arrogant, careless moves he was famous for. The more he thought he was in control, the deeper he'd dig his own hole. Meanwhile, I secured my position even further. I finalized a private contract amendment with the hotel that explicitly named only me as the business owner and project lead. I also had my lawyer file a quiet notice with the state business registry, tightening the corporate bylaws so that any attempted transfer of ownership without my approval would be null and void. By the time the local business awards dinner rolled around in April, I was in the strongest position I'd ever been. The hotel installation was nearly complete, my team was more loyal than ever, and my network of allies had grown so wide that even rumors couldn't hurt me. And sitting at that dinner, across the room from Mark, I knew something he didn't. The stage was set, the spotlight was ready, and all I had to do now was wait for him to step into it. It happened faster than I expected. 2 weeks after the awards dinner, Mark came swaggering into the shop with the same empty briefcase and an overconfident grin. "Big news," he announced, loud enough for the entire staff to hear. "I just closed a major partnership that's going to double our revenue." "You're welcome." I didn't ask who it was. I already knew. That competitor, the one quietly under investigation, had finally reeled him in. He pulled out a stack of papers and dropped them on my desk. "Sign these, and we'll make it official. They're offering us better supplier rates, plus a profit-sharing agreement. It's exactly what we need to take this place to the next level." I kept my face neutral as I flipped through the pages. The agreement was laughably one-sided, basically handing over key client accounts and giving this partner a cut of our largest contracts, including the hotel project. But Mark was so caught up in his own self-importance, he didn't even notice. "Mark," I said slowly, "before I sign anything, we should meet with them in person. That way, we can all be on the same page." "Perfect," he said. "They're free Friday." Friday came, and I walked into that meeting prepared. It was held at a sleek downtown office, and the competitor, let's call him Harris, was all smiles, probably thinking I was just going to rubber stamp the deal. Mark jumped right into his pitch, talking about our vision and our future. I let him talk. Then, when Harris slid the final agreement across the table, I leaned back and said, "Before we go any further, I just want to be clear, Mark doesn't have any ownership in my company. So whatever deal you think you're making with him, it's not legally binding." The room went still. Harris blinked. "What do you mean?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the updated corporate bylaws and the state registry filings. "I'm the sole owner. Always have been. Mark's been helping out unofficially, but he has no authority to sign contracts or make commitments on behalf of the company." I slid the papers toward Harris. "And given your current situation with the Department of Revenue," I added casually, "I'm not sure this is a partnership we'd be interested in anyway." The color drained from Harris's face. "Mark's, too. What situation?" Mark demanded, turning to Harris. I stood, tucking my documents back into my bag. "Maybe you two can discuss that privately. I've got real work to do." I left them there, stunned, and by the time I got back to the shop, my phone was already blowing up with texts from Mark. Angry, panicked, demanding I undo whatever I'd just done. I ignored every single one. The fallout started almost immediately. Harris, realizing Mark couldn't deliver anything he'd promised, cut off all contact. Word spread through our business circles, not because I said anything, but because people talk. Suddenly, Mark wasn't the new co-owner anymore. He was the guy who'd nearly dragged my company into a public scandal. And that was just the beginning of what I had lined up for him. By the following Monday, the ripple effects of that meeting had grown into full waves crashing down on Mark. First came the phone calls, from suppliers, clients, even a couple of old friends, asking why he'd been posing as the owner of my business. The word posing stung him more than I think he expected, because he called me in a fury that night, shouting about betrayal and how I'd embarrassed him in front of the entire business community. I let him rant, then calmly reminded him that he was the one who'd lied to everyone, and he was the one who had walked into a deal without knowing who he was dealing with. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The silence that followed told me he finally understood how badly he'd misplayed his hand. Then came the blow from our own family. My cousin Rebecca, who'd been quietly watching this whole time, shared the details of what had happened at the funeral, the break-in at my shop, and the attempted contract with Harris with several relatives who still believed Mark's co-owner's story. The reaction was swift. Aunts and uncles who once saw him as the charming golden boy started distancing themselves. Even Mom, who had been his silent ally, called me one evening sounding defeated. "I didn't know it was that bad," she said quietly. "I just thought, maybe you could work together. I didn't realize he was trying to take it from you. I didn't say I told you so. I just told her I was moving on. And I meant it." Mark's attempts to save face only made things worse. He tried starting another business venture with a friend from out of town, But by then his reputation had sunk so low that no one wanted to partner with him. Clients avoided him, business owners didn't return his calls, and his once active social media accounts went silent. Eventually, I heard through the grapevine that he'd sold his car and was renting out his apartment just to keep afloat. As for my company, we kept growing. The hotel project was completed on time and made the front page of the local business journal. My team was stronger than ever, my network deeper, and the safeguards I'd put in place meant no one, not even family, could ever threaten it again. Months later, I ran into Mark by chance at a coffee shop. He looked smaller somehow, not just physically, but in presence. He mumbled something about just trying to make things right back then, but I could tell even he didn't believe it. I simply nodded, picked up my order, and walked out without another word. Because the truth was, I didn't need to say anything. Everyone in town already knew exactly what had happened and what it had cost him. In the end, my father's business stayed exactly where it belonged, and Mark was left with nothing but the memory of the day he thought he could take it from me, and the moment he realized he never even stood a chance.